What were they now, but a stopover for the ships of other realms? The men of the Iron Islands served as deckhands and sailors for the other realms, navigators helping their Greenlander captains ferry goods around, the same men that could have been captains in their own right, leading warships and raiding parties wherever the crash of the waves could be heard, kings upon their decks, taking what they wanted when they wanted it, not working for foreign captains for a handful of coins. It was even worse for their women, who were fucking whoever could pay for them, walking along the quays of Lordsport and laying with the Greenlanders and bringing their bastards into the world for coppers. No one in the history of the Seven Kingdoms had ever fallen as far as his people, and yet it seemed they were falling even further. Had the drowned god abandoned them, right when they needed him most? He sighed and looked to the barkeep, a crusty man ever disappointed in his sons and daughters, with more a few drops of Stark blood in his veins. Another. "Haven't you had enough yet, Squid?" snarled the bartender, as angry as ever. Even here, in one of the few taverns that didn't throw him out the moment he stepped through the door, he wasn't always welcome. The North had smashed the Iron Islands alongside the rest of the Seven Kingdoms, killing his brothers in the process, but he had been taken as a hostage, too, and he had never once felt like he had a place at Winterfell, despite Lord Stark's hospitality. He reached into his coin purse without looking and threw He-Man a coin, not caring what he grabbed. It glimmered golden in the light seconds before the tavern keeper snatched it up greedily, staring at the gold dragon in awe before biting it to make sure it was real, making sure that his eyes weren't lying to him. He dropped it into the pocket closest to his heart, then immediately poured Theon another cup and left the nearly full flagon next to him, no questions asked. It wasn't the best wine, it wasn't Arbor Gold or a Dornish Red, no, it was from some part of the Reach or the Riverlands, but he didn't care much. Being drunk stops me from thinking about my home. My real home. He sighed again as he took a swallow of the sweet but sour red. The North drew its strength from the sheer numbers of people it had, nourished upon the beef of their furred cows, just as the Reach fed its people bread and vegetables. The two thrived off of their relation with one another, with Lannister gold in the middle that only served to fuel the flames, but what were the Iron Islands, when surrounded by giants? The only realm nearby with comparable strength were the Riverlands, and they had the direwolf watching over them as if they were its pup. Elsewise, the North, the Reach and the Westerlands, all three of them were stronger, far stronger than his homeland and getting more powerful by the day, all while his was weakening. What would tomorrow make them? Would the legacy of the Grey King come to an end with a quiet whimper, the Iron Islands being spoken about in the same breath as the Stepstones and the Three Sisters? But what can I do? He stared into the red in his cup, the surface as still as a calm ocean's day. I'm not even on the Iron Islands anymore, and I won't be till my father dies. I tried to run before and the wargs caught me before I got close to leaving the city. What could I do if I got out? Run across the North and the Riverlands, then swim the rest of the way. He sighed again in defeat. There was no way back to the Iron Islands, not yet, not till his father died, but even if he made his way there, what could he do? The Iron Islands were merely a stopover between the great powers of Westeros, a place to put in and pick up fresh supplies before continuing onwards. The only resource his people had in any abundance, iron, was hard to mine, so they used thralls, prisoners they captured on their many raids, to dig it out and forge it. They couldn't raid the countless scores of ships going past them every day, they came from the canal, and had the protection of the Starks. If there was one way to bring the entire fury of the North crashing down upon you, it was taking something that the North cared about. They didn't care for the South, or the Iron Throne, none of that had the interest of the Lords of Winter, but when someone did harm to something they truly cared about, the slumbering direwolf woke and used every last ounce of strength it had. Raiding, carrying out the old way and paying the iron price, none of it worked, not anymore, not since the wolf, the rose and the lion had trapped the kraken in a pond and learned all his tricks. He downed another cup, then poured himself another straight after. We can't keep living the way we are, it doesn't work, something has to change, before we all get killed. He set his cup down onto the pine table, thinking, as he always did. Something had to change. He thought about his home often, trying to come up with a way to fix the Iron Islands, to give his people a future worth living for, where they could be powerful again, proud of the iron that flowed in their veins, where they might have some riches like the North, or even cities of their own, but he had never managed to come up with anything, no matter how hard he tried. He drank and hoard, to drown out the thoughts that always came to mind whenever he thought about what Jon had said, whenever he thought of what was surely happening on the Iron Islands. But sometimes he attended Lord Stark's court, watching and listening and learning about how the North ran, how it had grown so strong and how it was growing stronger, year by year. But what works for them won't work for us. We don't have the land for pastures, the Iron Islands are hard, like us, and we do not, so there's no point, nothing grows there anyway. He looked into the depths of his wine, for any kind of answer he might find, only to start laughing at himself. I don't think the drowned god is in my wine, he muttered with half a laugh. Gods, boy, if you keep drinking like that you'll end up in a stupor, spoke the barkeep, walking over, having nothing better to do than speak with the man who paid him best. Might be I want to, Theon replied, starting to pour another cup into his cheaply made pewter cup. It's hard to have problems when you can't walk straight. The innkeeper laughed. At this point, you won't be able to piss straight when that lot hits you. Theon answered with a smile. I don't pay you to keep me sober. And you pay well, too. Might be that I don't want my best drinker to get himself killed. The innkeeper took the flagon and walked with it to a cask behind the bar, refilling it to the brim before putting it beside him. What are you drinking for, anyway? You go through more wine in a day than most people do in a fortnight. We've all got problems. Why do you care about mine? He asked, the cheap wine starting to make its way to his head. The tavern keeper shrugged. Well, if you really want to know, you know who I am, so you know where I come from. I'm going to be Lord of the Iron Islands someday, whenever my father dies, but, the North, it has so much more. He sighed again, what's the point? I'll never have any of this. He waved his hands drunkenly across the room, towards the door and the streets outside. When I was young, a boy younger than you, my father told me if I wanted something, I had to work for it. No one gets something good for free. He gestured to the roof over their heads with a smile. You have to work for the things you want. Suddenly, he asked, how many sons do I have? What? How many sons do I have? Asked the innkeeper again with a sly but proud smile. 2. 3, corrected the man, his smile never failing for a moment. My eldest works here, my third son works here, but my second, he's at the castle, training to be a guard. Might be he'll end up on the household guard one day, might be he could be captain of the guards or master at arms, even castellan. Why are you telling me all this? He asked as he took a sip of his wine. Because you never know what tomorrow might bring. My grandsons might be sworn swords to the Starks, maybe their grandsons could be lords. You might start poor, like my father, but if you work hard, you can get good things. He has no idea what he's talking about. It can't be that simple. That might work for a tavern, but that's not a lordship. Lords get what they have, they can't make it better. Really, the innkeeper, so a lord can't add parts onto their castles? You know what I mean. No, I don't, growled the innkeeper. You can't make more land, that's right, but you can make what you have better. You get what you work for. You're starting to sound like an Ironborn. He laughed as he drank till his cup ran dry. Squid, and you're meant to be iron, but to me you look like nothing but rust. Theon glared at the innkeeper angrily. Rust? He rose from his seat. Rust, you say? The man laughed. Rust, because you've lost the fire that makes you you. I can see it in your eyes, lad. You've given up. I haven't given up. I am Ironborn, he shouted in anger. We never give up. We take what we want, when we want it. The man grinned. Don't tell that to me. Tell it to yourself. He wasn't even sure if it was him or the drink talking at this point, swaying as he stood. I have salt water in my veins. I am Ironborn and we never surrender. He stormed off, half angry and half bitter, but determination filled his heart just as wine filled his belly. I won't let the Isles go down without a fucking fight. He tore his coin purse from his belt and hurled it across the room in anger. Surprisingly, the tavern keeper caught it with a grin, pulling the little bag open and scooping out all the coins inside, gold dragons, silver stags and copper stars alike. But Theon didn't care, not for a moment, as he walked out, hearing only a faint mutter as he looked down the street, no, not down the street, past the walls of Winterfell, past the north, towards the shores of his distant home, the Iron Islands. I miss my mother, and Asher, she'd know what to do. Asher always knew what to do. Another one of the bastard's words came to mind as he thought of his fierce sister, who shielded him from the worst parts of their brothers, their cruel and hateful brothers who loved nothing more than to mock him. But who's left to mock me now, Roderick? You're dead, Maren's dead, but I'm still here. Me and Asher. He laughed as he swayed his way towards Winterfell, tripping and stumbling as any drunk would. The guards sighed and grumbled under their breath as he passed through a barbican and into the castle courtyards, where he spied Adra, leaning down to grab a blue winter rose growing against the side wall of the first keep, rump in the air ever so temptingly as she tried to get the rose from the ground without cutting her soft hands upon the thorns. I had her maidenhead, and I have her every other night, and tonight, too. He grinned as he walked over, hearing her humming a tune with her beautiful voice. He walked up behind her and playfully gave her a little fondle, and she yelped in surprise, bolting upright and staring at him with skin as pale as bone and looking as though she was about to faint. Theon. What are you gods, please don't. She stammered, cowering backwards against the side walls of the first keep in fear, afraid he might touch her again. Oh, bugger. That's not Adra. Oh, I thought you were your sister. My sister, she breathed a sigh of relief, but stared at him with fear in her eyes all the same. She's in your chambers, I think. He smiled at her, and seemed to shrink down against the walls even more. Then he turned and walked away from her and into the keep, paying no attention to the happenings around him. He went up the stairs, through the warm halls, and entered his chambers, which were comfortably large, only a little smaller than the ones he had at Pike, but much better fitted, part of Lord Stark's efforts to make him feel more at home. He heard a soft growl from his bed, and spied the other dark Stark girl lying under his covers. So there you are. It's not nice to leave a lady all on her lonesome. She teased with a smile. I've been waiting for hours, so I've had to keep myself busy. He smiled back at her as he walked over. She sniffed the air, and frowned. You've been drinking, haven't you? Is that bad? Only if you've drank so much that you're a floppy squid. She smiled again, a smile that drove him mad to see. Gods, she might not be the prettiest but she can drive a man wild. He had bedded her 100 times, if not more, but who hadn't had her at least once? Still, he had a fondness for the lustful she-wolf and her insatiable appetite, with her being his favorite partner beneath the fur blankets that covered his bed. That never happens, Ada, and you know it, he grinned. She laughed, and with a daring look in her eyes, she asked, prove it. He threw off his clothes and joined her beneath the covers, and like he said, he was not a floppy squid. Then he fell asleep. When he woke again, Adra was missing, the sun had set, the warmth of all that wine had turned to a throbbing headache and his back stung everywhere the she-wolf had scratched when he had took her. Gods, what was I doing earlier? I can't remember anything, I know it was something important, but what? Then it struck him, like the blow of a hammer. Asher. He threw his clothes on, not caring for something to eat or drink just yet, not when he couldn't remember anything from before his slumber, nothing but his sister, and that he needed her help, now, more than ever before. He walked out of his room and headed towards the rookery to send a message, mind ablaze as he thought of the first words his sister and his entire family would hear from him since he left the Iron Islands. Then, piece by piece, a plan started to come together. I can't leave Winterfell, they won't let me, but there's nothing stopping her from coming here. Asterisk 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 asterisk. End of part 7. Notes. Asterisk 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 asterisk. End of part 7. I'll be honest, I had some trouble with this part, but in the end, I think it came out pretty well. It actually went through a number of revisions, like once where the entire part was one big Adra and Theon scene from start to finish, between rounds of boinking, but I thought this was better. Though, I might write the other for a little bit of practice and let people choose between the two. Theon's a little worse off than he was in canon, simply put. He has come from a land that had no cities and no great wealth, so when he arrived in the north a few years ago it absolutely awed him. He had never seen a city before, or such a display of wealth, even though the northerners are certainly modest with how they use their coin, so it hit him really, really hard. When he arrived at Winterfell, he not only had to come to face with now being the heir to the Iron Islands, but being one of the lesser fish there amongst the lords, especially if you judge one's might by the amount of coin they have, and even worse, he had to face those problems alone, with Robb and his wolves wanting little to do with him. So, he's latched onto the one thing he knew, the one source of calm amongst the storm, his memories of home and his family. They might not have been the best family, and his father might not have been kind either, but they are the only family he has ever truly known. He feels like he doesn't belong in Winterfell, and is certainly jealous of Robb and Jon, wanting a city of his own. But then there is the other part, the desire to make the Iron Islands strong, a force to be reckoned with. As the power of the North, the Lannisters and the Tyrells continues to rise, the Iron Islands are going to be surrounded by powerful realms on all sides, so a part of him believes that the old way just won't work anymore, but another part of him knows that doing nothing would just result in them falling so far behind they'll never be a great power again. He might not know the reality of what is going on at the Iron Islands, but he has an idea, and really wants to help the people he rules over, however he can. But another part of him has romanticized the Ironborn way of life, the old way and the idea of paying the iron price for things, and that innkeeper brought it out. He's stuck between believing in the old ways, and trying to find a new one. So he's turning to the one person he trusts the most in the world, his sister, Asha. And then you have the first mention of the North's flagship on the western coast, the Golden Wolf, a ship that is half Westerman and half Northern by design, with a solid gold wolf on the front that came from nowhere else but the Westerlands. Aeron Greyjoy is still alive, thank the drowned god, but he's lost an eye and an arm. Chapter 8, Eddard I. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Eddard flipped through the pages of his ledger, through years of northern history and financing, with the first few pages written in the smooth hand of his father and not his own. Every year showed a little bit more growth in the numbers, more gold dragons pouring into the vaults of Winterfell, a little bit more being taxed by the Iron Throne, but otherwise the economy was thriving and growing year after year. His father had kept a tidy book, neatly organizing the numbers into categories with little notes at the side to say what was happening in the world and how that was affecting the North's economy. Every major house in the North had their own section where their tax income was reported, showing where money was coming from and going to. Then those numbers were broken down again to show where his vassals got their money and what their own expenditures were, giving him a rough estimate of their own wealth, too. It had taken years of practice for him to get used to managing the North's finances himself, even though it was the duty of his steward to manage the finances of Winterfell and the North. His father had always taught him that it was best for him to take a look at the books himself every once in a while, to see how prosperous the North was at a moment's glance. One look at these pages can tell me more than months of travel, but that does not mean that I do not see my people in person and see how they are living. He was in the den, a cozy, warm and quiet room for him to retire to that was nestled in the heart of Winterfell's great keep. It had all the functions of his solar, but it was more out of the way, a place of solitude for him to think and relax in private, away from the stresses of normal life. Bookcases lined the walls on either side of him, packed with carefully kept old books bound in thick leather. They were not histories or the thoughts of maesters, they were money ledgers and journals, thoughts and ideas from stark lords of old long since dead, plans and ambitions that had been passed down from one generation to the next, recording every event of importance in the North's history for generations, saying why his ancestors, the Starks who ruled Winterfell before him and before his father, had done what they had. They were accompanied by letters from noble houses long since extinct and ancient maps that grew more faded and had less and less noble houses the further back in time they went, some few even showing Winterfell as a castle and not as the great city it had become. Silver sconces dotted the gaps between the bookcases, carefully made so that the torches inside them shone as bright as they could, with a gigantic snow bear pelt covering the floor, so vast it stretched from the left bookcases to the ones on the right and with the head in front of his study and the tiny block of hair that was the tail in front of the door. Even now, over a decade after his father and his elder brother had died at King's Landing, murdered by the Mad King Aes, it was still hard to see the den as being truly his. He had only been inside the room once in his childhood, when his father told that he was going to the Vale to be fostered, his clever father, who no fox could match in cunning. Even now I still cannot know for sure what plans he made inside these walls. His books only say half of it all, about meetings with Olenna Tyrell and Tywine Lannister, with page after page of confusing half-truths and riddles. Father, what were you planning? He signed off on the ledger, taking his quill from its inkpot and writing his name and title on the bottom of the page, showing that he had seen and reviewed the numbers for the year 297 after Aegon's conquest, adding in a few notes for name-a-days, feasts and other such events besides expenses to explain where they came from. His eyes lingered upon the interest payments from the Iron Throne, a great sum of gold and silver shipped in a dozen coffers from the Red Keep to White Harbour before being escorted the rest of the way by his own men. They were efforts of his king, his friend Robert Baratheon, to pay off his debts, but he was paying the barest amount he could, not even making an impact in his great debt of 500,000 gold dragons. The faith in the south were not fond of the idea of interest, calling it usury and a sin, but the old gods had no such qualms, and neither did the merchants from across the narrow sea, who had taught the north how to manage money on a vast scale. The north kept its own account with the Iron Bank of Braavos, a place where the savings of his family could be kept for generations on end, a little bit more added whenever he could, a place where gold dragons left and returned with hatchlings, as the Iron Bank used some of his family's fortunes for loans across the narrow sea, returning a small piece of the profits they made into the accounts of his family and using that again for more loans, so they gained a little bit more each and every time. Generation after generation. Now, they had a few million gold dragons stored away beneath the Iron Bank, 2 centuries of interest. The Starks did not spend their gold often, letting it pile up in the reserves of Winterfell and of the Iron Bank rather than throwing it away on baubles and other such pointless things. Winter was coming, so having a vast reserve of gold that could be used at a moment's notice in times of need was of utmost importance. He had taken 100,000 gold dragons from the vaults of Winterfell at the start of the rebellion, 100,000 to pay for the costs of assembling the mighty host of northern troops, to pay them for the length of the campaign, to assemble the enormous supply train he needed to carry an offensive into the south, and to put all the ships of the north to sea for action at a moment's notice. We brought not just the troops needed to win the war, but the gold, too. You cannot win a war with men and ships alone. There was a quiet tapping on the door, so he closed the ledger and returned his quill to its resting place. "Come in." In stepped his maester and trusted adviser, Lewin, who had helped the midwife bring his children into the world. The maester's chain dangled heavy from his neck, the smoky black Valyrian steel link glittering in the light of the torches, and in his hand he had a number of letters, with all manners of crests and a rainbow's worth of coloured wax seals. "My lord, messages, from White Harbour and the other holds, along with one from across the narrow sea." "The Iron Bank, my lord." He walked over and handed them to his liege lord, setting them down upon the table. Eddard took the pale white one with the thick grey wax seal of the Iron Bank first. "I was just looking through the ledgers," he said as he took his letter opener and slid it through the grey wax scales that sealed the letter. It was a statement from the Iron Bank, written upon the exotic and very expensive bone-white paper that came only from Yeti in the furthest reaches of the known world, every letter written in an ink that was as black as the darkest night. "To our cherished friend and honourable business partner, Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell. The year of 297 since Aegon's conquest was a great one for the Iron Bank of Braavos, with the representatives of the bank resolving a trade dispute between Myr and Pentos, as well as opening formal relations with the realms of the Summer Islands. It has been one of the most profitable years in the history of the bank, with all its customers great and small thriving because of it. As requested in the days of your noble Lord Father, may his rest be peaceful, here is the annual report on the accounts of House Stark. 100,000 gold dragons had been deposited into our vaults 2 centuries ago at the negotiated interest rate of 2% per year, which brings the accounts of the Stark family to 5,441,666 gold dragons, alongside change of silver stags and copper stars rounded down." He stared at the vast number with a mix of happiness and awe. It had been almost the entire wealth of his family nearly 200 years ago, sent across the narrow sea after months of negotiation with the Iron Bank to get the best rates that the Lord of Winterfell could get, who had bartered with the bank while it was drastically weakened after the Dance of the Dragons. Now, the North could make 200,000 dragons in a decade, and their incomes were only rising. They were still nowhere near as wealthy as the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, who could throw mountains of gold at any problem they faced without so much as a dip in their coffers, but they were a match for the Reach, man for man and coin for coin. Both the North and the Reach drew their wealth from their fields, with the Reach growing grains and acting as the bakery and the garden of the seven kingdoms, while the North tended to great herds of furred cows and was the slaughterhouse and butchery of the realm. The furred cows had made the North stronger, richer than ever before, a true power to be reckoned with in the lands of Westeros. The North in the days of the last king, Torrhen, could field an army of 30,000 men, less than half as many as he had when he went south with 70,000 in Robert's rebellion, but Torrhen had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to do it, gathering up every man strong enough to carry a weapon, from farmhands to blacksmiths to merchants and nobles. But now the North could field an army of 100,000 swords, and they were trained men at arms, professional warriors, not peasant levies or arrow fodder. In his grief after surrendering the ancestral crown of the Kings of Winter, it had been Torrhen and his bastard brother Brandon Snow who had found the furred cows in the first place while visiting the northern mountain clans as they had travelled through the North together. His brother hoped that seeing the realm he ruled might raise the spirits of the former king, so they toured the realm together escorted by only a handful of retainers, and in the midst of a powerful snowstorm they had become separated from their meager escort, and by chance, after wandering in search of their group, they stumbled upon the great orange-haired beasts, seeing them utterly unfazed by the cold winds or the heavy snowfall. The two brothers instantly saw their great potential and gathered up a herd's worth with their escort after the storm died. Then they returned to Winterfell after cutting their travels short. Since then, the North had never been the same. Torrhen buried himself in work, dedicated the rest of his life to ensuring that the North got the most out of the wondrous creatures, claiming that they were the key to the North's future, a gift from the old gods themselves. He immediately set to work gathering the best herdsmen and cattle breeders from throughout the North, though the lords of the North were skeptical of his words and his blind belief that such a simple thing as a cow with fur instead of fat would be the North's salvation, claiming that he had gone mad from his sorrow. However, they had no choice but to eat such thoughts when he held a feast in the midst of a long, terrible winter. After the winter came to an end, the powerful creatures spread across the lands of the North like a wildfire, every lord realizing the potential of an animal that could graze in the fields in days so cold that normal cows would freeze to death in their barns. Though he had lost the crown, he had given the North something far more valuable than any title, a cheap, reliable and plentiful food supply. The people of his realm high and low gave him a new title to replace the one he lost when he knelt before the conqueror, Torrhen Beef King. Torrhen knew that for the North to thrive, he had to mend our food supply. The North needs people like a castle wall needs building blocks, and people need food to live. Since then, the North had grown and prospered in its splendid isolation, staying out of the affairs of the South for as long as they could, content to focus on internal matters and growth. While King Maegor the Cruel was breaking the back of the faith militant, collecting the scalps of the warriors' sons and poor fellows to feed to Balerion, the North was resting and recovering. When the dragons danced against one another in the skies of Westeros and the Seven Kingdoms fractured into open civil war, the North sent a handful of troops to show who they supported, but remained content to work long and hard at home. There they raised new walls and new keeps for the first time in generations, rebuilding the old castles and holdfasts, mending the wounds of the past and sending gold across the narrow sea, reopening trade with the free cities and beginning the long work of restoring the fleets of the North to their former glory. Cregan Stark went south and spoke, the hour of the wolf, and the entire realm quaked at the sound of his voice. When Aegon the Unworthy made the realm bleed by giving black fear to his bastard son after the failures of Baelor the Blessed, the North raised an army, not of warriors to fight and to die in the battles of the Sotar, but an army of laborers with the order to build the Great Canal and to cut the land in twain, as none had ever done before. Nothing had changed Westeros as much as the canal had before or since, not even the construction of the wall. The South held that Brandon the Builder had started the construction, built half of it even before he died. But the truth was more than that, more complex as the truth tended to be. He really had started work on the construction, but he had only completed a third of it before he became too frail to travel and abandoned the work his mastery of architecture and giants had started but could not finish. It had been Myrish engineers, armed with glass eyes and wooden cranes powered by oxen, that had finished what he had started so long ago. Brandon the Builder had a legendary grasp on the knowledge of construction, but his plans had been flawed and were incomplete. The metalworking and mathematics of the time were simply not advanced enough for such a construction, but they had finally come of age with the Valyrian freehold and had matured enough to make it possible. There were dozens of books about the canal and its impact on the Seven Kingdoms now. It had made Old Town change what it was, strengthened Lannisport, Gulltown, White Harbor and the whole north, and it had ripped out the heart of Dorne. In a rash decision they had even once threatened war in the wake of the Black Fira Rebellion, so angered by the canal and how it had changed the flow of trade away from their shores. But as they gathered their spears for a new conflict, they saw the Golden Lion of the Lannisters, battered and bruised but unbroken by the Black Fira Rebellion, come to stand at the side of the direwolf who was helping them recover from the costly war. Then the tigers and elephants of Volantis joined them, the crossbows and craftsmen of Myr, the fleets and wealth of Bravos. They did not demand Dorne to back down, no, they ordered it to, a command that rattled the very foundations of the Seven Kingdoms when they were at their weakest. The North, seeing allies coming to its side and confident that their trade lanes were safe and that the Dornish would draw their swords and complain but do little more, returned to its long slumber to grow and to rest for another century, as uninterested in the affairs of the Southron as ever, contemptuous of their games of politics and intrigue and petty squabbles. But under his father, the direwolf had started to wake, taking more and more interest in the happenings south of the Neck, watching and waiting from afar. The Lannisters and the Starks grew close and closer, the wolf and the lion acting as allies, and even the Rose had joined them later on, the three greatest powers in the Seven Kingdoms working together with plans and interests all of their own. For a time, he thought that he might have been sent to the great golden fortress of Casterly Rock to be a ward, or to Highgarden in the land of flowers and nights. He had never expected to be sent to the Eyrie. But that was a time long ago now, a time when he had an elder brother who was to be the Lord of Winterfell and husband to Catelyn Tully, a stern but caring and loving father, and a wild sister no one could or would dare to control, as fierce as any direwolf should be. He sighed sadly at the old memories, then he continued with the letter, the rest of which were simply dry numbers and information about how the Stark fortunes would continue to increase over the years to come, and an invitation to visit the Iron Bank to see his family's wealth in person, in the vaults of the Iron Bank. Though that was clearly a front to try and get him to renegotiate terms now that the Iron Bank was much stronger than it had been when the Lord of Winterfell forced his terms on them. "My lord, you look troubled," said his maester with a frown of concern. "Is everything all right?" He looked at his maester, seeing the concern on his old face and answering truthfully. "It is nothing, maester, just memories." He took the next letter, sealed with the green and blue merman of the Mandaelis and written in the hand of Lord Wyman himself, a jovial and friendly man, as large as the cows he sucked upon, but perhaps the most loyal of his bannermen. He proudly reported the completion and commissioning of another 6 vessels for the Northeastern Fleet, 2 war galleys and 4 hoaks to serve as their escorts, ready to go on 2 patrols or on trade missions. The 3-decked wardromans of the south were unsuitable for the colder, rougher waters of the north, where icebergs were a threat even in summer, and where the size of the ocean that the North had to patrol meant that small, fast-sailing ships were more useful than large, slow ones moved by oars. Hoaks were much smaller than dromans, the largest being roughly equivalent to a ship of 2 decks, with their roots in the river-going vessels of the White Knife and the Weeping Water rather than the cogs that sailed the seas, but they were much faster than any dromand, more maneuverable, cheaper and quicker to build in large numbers. They were easier to supply and repair due to their simple construction, and they could quickly and easily be turned into merchant ships in times of peace, or into transports and warships when the war horns howled their grim note. For the price and time of building a single dromand, 6 hoaks could be built, and they were so simple a design that a fishing village could mend any damage they took or even build a new one, albeit a small one. They were so simple it was practically effortless to turn them into merchant ships, which meant they could even pay off their own construction costs within a few short years. They were the ideal choice for a northern admiral that was hunting pirates, as their speed meant that a pack of them, a wolf pack, could chase down a single galley and force them into a battle on the attacker's terms, where the lone ship would be hopelessly outclassed, even though one galley carried far more weapons and men than a single hoak. But the speed of the lighter, smaller ships let them force battles and stopped a heavier, slower galley from being able to make use of most of their weapons, turning them into large floating targets just waiting to be destroyed one piece at a time. But in a clash of 2 fleets upon the waves, they were less useful, so the North had no choice but to still build war galleys for battles at sea, but even there the humble hoak found a purpose by running down any enemy ships that tried to flee the battle, forcing them to strike their colors and surrender or be boarded by a ship with holds packed with dozens of men trained and equipped for a fight at sea, wearing heavier armor than any sailor and carrying grapnels, crossbows and swords. Then there was another letter from the Dread Fort, sealed with a screaming head made from soft pink wax. Lord Bolton has been wanting Sansa and his son married for years, but she is not even of age yet. This letter was much like all the others, a subtle hint from Lord Roose Bolton that he would like the wedding to occur sooner rather than later, telling Eddard how he had found a suitable dower for Sansa in the countryside that would make for a fine estate, nestled within some rolling hills in the Bolton lands, far from the small city that surrounded the dread fort, but easy to travel to and from and certainly capable of providing for his eldest daughter should she outlive her potential husband. Though they were not formally betrothed, not yet anyway, but they were extremely close already. But I will not have them betrothed, not for a few more years. Should things fall apart between the two and their love breaks apart, I will not have her forced into a marriage she would not want to be a part of. I would never allow it. Domeric was a kind and brave man with a gentle heart, interested not in whoring, drinking or fighting, but in reading, listening and learning about the past from whoever or whatever could help him on his quest for more knowledge. He could compose fine pieces of poetry and playing the harp was but another of his passions, but he was a talented jouster too, a natural when it came to steeds of all kinds with a bright future in the tourney lists of the south. But all that added up to a man who Eddard prayed would never meet Robert Baratheon face to face when the king was drunk, one he would never let anywhere near Winterfell had he already been married. But he would not stop his children marrying for love, he would never marry them off to someone against their will, he could never live with himself for doing so. But so long as Sansa loved Domeric, he was happy for the young couple and gave them both his blessings. He set Lord Bolton's letter aside, then turned his attention to the last one, which bore the 12 towers of Moat Cailin in a circle of dark green wax. This one was damaged, soaked with water and stained with circles of scarlet blood, too. What happened to the raven that delivered this message? He asked as the letter dripped onto his study in blooming splotches of red and black. I am afraid it died, my lord. Whether from blood loss or infection, I cannot be certain. It must have been attacked by an eagle on the way here. Eddard sighed and quickly took his letter opener and slid it through the wax, hoping to read as much of the message as he could before too much ink was lost. It was fortunate that the bird made it here at all, my lord. The parchment had been torn and ripped through where the eagle's talons had shredded the leather wrapping used to protect the message from the elements as the raven flew on its long journey from castle to city. Ravens were fast and clever birds, able to outwit most predators or outrun those they couldn't, but if they got caught by even a young golden eagle, it would take a miracle for the strongest ravens to stand a chance of surviving the fight, with winning it being nigh impossible. Goldwing was a gigantic eagle and was still growing, larger than any other eagle he had seen in his time in the Vale, bar one he had glimpsed after having far too many cups of a strong Stormlander ale with Robert in the Eyrie, when both of them were still little more than boys. The cask had been sent by his castellan as a gift for his 12th name-a-day and they had half of it between the both of them, getting so drunk they came up with a game where they got flails from the armory and smashed the spiked balls from their chains, then struck them with their wooden practice swords to see who could send them flying the furthest off the mountain's peak. It was a game that Robert won 9 times out of 10, even though he had only begun to start growing into his full strength at the time. On one attempt, with a rusty ball of iron and Robert roaring with a determination to drive it as far as he could, he struck the ball with so much force he shattered it into a dozen pieces alongside the oaken longsword he hit it with, the rusted pieces scattering as they shot through the skies. Then, when they hit the ground in the distant trees, he saw a great bird as big as a house throw itself into the sky with a single flap of its monstrous wings, then fly away. Robert stared agape at the sight of the giant bird. He had seen it too. But when they told their foster father Jon Arryn he had laughed it off and told them it was the drink, making them both see things that weren't there, then scolded the both of them for breaking every ball and chain the heir had. He was probably right, Jon Arryn usually is. But there are so many eagles in the north now they are starting to become a problem. They hunt ravens, they attack calves, lambs and hens and are growing more and more daring with every passing year. He shook his head with a sigh as he opened the letter and saw all the text smudged and runny beyond any recognition, the parchment a mess of blood, ink and water. But he could still make out a few words on the parchment, though not a whole sentence. Lannister, North, King, Tolls. He stared at the paper for a moment before sighing again. My lord, asked his maester. The letter does not make any sense anymore, not with so few words left. He folded it closed and set it down away from all the other letters to keep it from staining the other messages. He picked up the ledger and rose from the seat, holding the book carefully under his arm. It was time to hold court, so he walked over to an empty space amongst the other books and slid it in at the end of a row of 4 others, each holding nearly 20 years of financing. They were a monument to the growth of the North and the strength of its people, with the oldest book written nearly 50 years after the end of Egon's conquest. In those times, the North was still poor, much poorer than it was today, closer to the Stormlands than to the Reach or the Vale, but now the North's incomes were tied for second and on par with the Reach, the 2 regions making more money than the rest of the 7 kingdoms aside from the Westerlands, though the reserves of the Lannisters were much larger than those of anyone else, simply because of how many gold mines there were in their lands and how little Tywin Lannister cared for the objections of the faith when he charged interest upon his loans. Eddard was never concerned at all by the fact that the Westerlands made more money than the North, literally, since most of the crown mints were in the Westerlands besides the gold mines. Like his forefathers, he preferred to stay out of Southron affairs and politics, just as the North had always done before his father in the days since Egon's conquest. Besides, Robert and Jon Arryn are doing a fine job together in the capital, I am sure. I would gladly help either of them if they asked for it. Robert had been utterly crushed after the end of the rebellion. His heart had been broken and his dream of being Eddard's good brother stolen from him with the death of Lyanna, a death he mourned as much as Eddard had. So many of the North's sons that had been fostered at Winterfell had followed his brother to King's Landing either to die or to be thrown into the dungeons of the Red Keep and left to rot till the city fell, that it came down to only those who had not been at Winterfell when his brother and many of those who followed him rode to their deaths. Theoval had been with his clan for one of their feasts, Willam Dustin had been with his wife and had been busy getting her with child, and Howland Reed had been recalled to his lands for whatever reason. It been those 3 who had been his companions throughout the war, alongside the ferocious great Jon Umber, who went into battle with a great sword of castle-forged steel bigger than ice and could slaughter a dozen men in the time it took him to defeat a single foe. They found many more of the northern lords and heirs still alive thanks to Tywin Lannister. His sack of King's Landing had been a bloody massacre for the guards who had opened the gates for him in the expectation that he had come to help them, even worse for the men holding the Red Keep, but it had saved the lives of many of the men who had ridden with his brother, though some had already died, either because of the Mad King's torturers or claimed by the skeletal hand of starvation, like Martin Castle had. Mark Ryswell had been on the brink of death from his wounds when the city fell. Had it not been for the Lord Lannister ensuring that he was treated quickly, he would have never survived the war. But, then there was the children, the little Princess Rhaenys and her baby brother Aegon. He saved many of my friends, but that does not forgive what happened to the children, gods, the children. They were caught in the crossfire, he said. Elia tried to flee with them to Dragonstone, but I saw the bodies and a half-dozen red and gold quarrels sticking out of the princess's back, and the boy, gods, he had a head. He had argued with Robert openly when he saw the bodies, appalled at how the man who had been his brother dismissed their deaths so quickly as a necessity. A wounded Barristan Selmy watching the both of them as Jon Arryn tried to settle the argument as he always had, but in the end, it never mattered. There was still one last battle to be fought in the war, the only battle that truly mattered to him. Lyanna. He knew where she was, more or less, and she was protected by the final 2 members of the Kingsguard. But that was one of the biggest mysteries of them all. Robert had almost been slain by the Dragon Prince in the waters of the Trident, barely defeating him after a long and hard fight that had left him gravely wounded, even though the Targaryen loyalists had been outnumbered nearly 3 to 1. He had finally gained the upper hand after catching the prince off balance by swinging in the opposite direction that Rhaegar had expected, crumpling his left shin and sending him crashing into the waters before Robert brought down a killing blow upon his head. It didn't matter whether or not the prince was wearing his helmet, it would never have made a difference either way. Eddard had saw the remains. It was as though someone crushed a peach in the midst of a gauntlet fist. He was utterly unrecognizable even to Barristan Selmy. But there had never been a sign of Arthur Dayne in the entire battle, not a trace of him aside from a bloody Dawn being found amongst the dead Dane men after the battle was over, enough to show that he had been on the field in the first place. Some thought he had stripped off his white armor and cloak to fight amongst the men of his house so that he would not be given any special treatment as a hostage, others that he had blooded the blade and ran, leaving the sword as one last act of honor before fleeing the battle, but no one knew what had happened for certain. Robert was in no state for another fight after his duel. It had been a miracle he survived at all, an even greater one that he recovered from his wounds harder and stronger, so he could not argue with Eddard for long, not when the Grand Maester gave him milk of the poppy as he set to work on saving the king's life. So Eddard went alone with his companions to put an end to the war and finish what they had initially set out to do, with one extra following them. Tyrjet Lannister, eager to prove his skill at blades and to earn himself a place in history outside of his brother's shadow after the two had yet another argument in the Red Keep, in front of their new king no less. He had no love for the head of his family, so he had followed Eddard to Dorne, disobeying the Lord Lannister's order for him to return to the Rock and to serve as his brother's castellan. He was a great swordsman, a demon with a blade in his hand, the man who had taught his nephew Jaime how to fight, though the young White Cloak had more natural talent and agility, going into battle with a parrying dagger and a longsword together rather than sword and shield. Eddard had been reluctant at first, but Tyrjet was eager to fight and an experienced swordsman, and he knew he might need another blade against the final two White Cloaks. So, they rode long and fast into Dorne, knowing that was where the prince had taken her, listening to the tales of the peasantry to give them an idea of where she had went, Tyrjet and he paying in gold and silver for the barest scraps of information that could help them find his sister. He might not have had any love for the Lannisters anymore, not after the sack, but he put that aside for the time being, for the sake of his sister. Together, with Howland Reed, the Great Jon Umber, Theo Vull, Willam Dustin and Tyrjet Lannister, they rode to the Tower of Joy, a band of heroes with a single quest in mind, to rescue his sister, like something out of a song, a legend like those old Nan would tell to him and his family when they were so much younger and smaller, children listening to her stories with their father watching them with a smile. The sun had been low in the sky, bathing the land in a dark crimson as the sun rose upon the dawn of a new day, the tower's shadow stretching across the distance, revealing it to them with the glimmer of plate armor and the fluttering white of cloaks like sails. They rode towards the tower as swift as the wind, and when they got close he demanded they surrender and release his sister, to swear fealty to their new king, as Barristan Selmy had. The Lord Commander was steadfast, refusing to recognize Robert Baratheon as his new king, refusing to disobey the final order his prince had given him, even in death. Tyrjet told them how Jaime had killed their king by driving his blade into his back, but they simply called him a false brother, an oath-breaker, saying how he would have never managed to do it had they been there and not at the tower carrying out the wishes of their slain prince, and when they heard of how Barristan had joined Robert's side, they acknowledged his bravery for fighting against him and told him that 'twas his choice to make, and that they had made theirs. Then she screamed a long and high howl, and the entire world exploded into action at the sound of her pain. Theo Vull went for the Lord Commanded, backed by Tyrjet Lannister, with Eddard and Howland Reed focusing all their attention against Oswyl went with the Great Jon at their side, more an animal than a man. The keys dangled from the Lord Commander's belt, but the muscular knight was able to fight both of them well, though he was gradually being driven back against the walls of the tower. Any ill will Eddard might have bore for the Lannisters started to ebb away as Tyrjet risked life and limb for his sister's sake, fighting the Lord Commander to a standstill after Theo was shoved away by the White Bull. Oswyl fought valiantly and bravely, but he was the first to fall before the brute power of their group and the weight of numbers, being outmaneuvered and outmatched. Howland Reed darted around him fast and deadly, slipping his spear through the joints of his armor, a death by 1,000 stabs till the Great Jon wrestled him from behind, opening him up for Willam to hamstring him, forcing him to one knee, and then Eddard came in with ice raised and with a single killing blow he took the Went Knight's head from his shoulders, helmet and head falling to the ground and rolling away from one another with a soft thump and a clank. Then they turned their attention to the Lord Commander in time to watch him thrust his sword into Theo's bell and rip him open before shoving him off his sword with a slam of his huge shoulders. Tyrjet rushed him, as brave and as fierce as any lion, holding him at bay as the Vull crawled away from the fight with one hand, trying to put his bowels back in with the other, giving him a fighting chance before the Lord Commander could finish him off. He ran as fast as his body could take him, coming into the fight, at the exact moment the White Bull thrust for him, holding the grip of his longsword with one hand and the blade with the other for more strength. His blade was out of the way with no time to raise it, no time to block or to parry or to dodge, only time to die when the blade struck him. Or he would have died, had it not been for Tyrjet Lannister taking the blow to the side of his armor. There was so much force behind it his blade wobbled and warped as it breached the Lannister's plate at its weakest point, biting through steel and cloth and into the flesh beneath, at the right side, almost a miss as it clipped past his side. but it was enough to take him out of the fight, sending him crashing to the ground in pain, clutching at the side of his armor as blood dripped from inside, falling unconscious from the pain of what could have been a killing blow had it been a little further to the left. Eddard defended the fallen lion, ice clashing against the Lord Commander's steel as the other men hammered at him. He was strong, large and muscular, built like a watchtower, with thick plate that was nigh impossible to break through, even for the Valyrian steel greatsword he wielded. Even the great Yonumber could not match him strength for strength, and though the Lord Commander had begun to tire from the lengthy fight, he still had a lot of energy in him. He slammed into the great Yonumber with his shield and sent the giant Northman reeling, moving in for a quick flurry to finish him. Then Howland Reed hurled his net and sent him crashing to the ground, tangled tightly and knocked out of the fight by the most simple of weapons. He had fought against such tricks before, against the Kingswood Brotherhood, and quickly started to free himself, tossing and rolling and trying to get a grip of the edge so as to pull it off of him. But Howland Reed never gave him the opportunity. He leapt onto him with a dagger, long and thin, to slip through the gaps of a knight's armor and to give the crippled men after a battle a swift and painless death, and thrust it through his visor in single quick, fluid movement. In an instant, the white bull that had fought the strongest men in the north to a standstill was dead, slain with ease by a diminutive Cranogman, even if he had not chosen the most honorable of weapons or methods to do so. Theoval was limp with skin as pale as curdled milk, Tyrjet Lannister unconscious with no idea of what battle was raging above him, and the great Jon winded with ribs cracked by the force of the hit. Quickly, as his sister cried out again, Brandon's name, the name of all her family and even Robert's at one point, he took the keys from the slain Lord Commander's belt and rushed up the steps. The rest was too painful to think about even now, a decade and a half after the fight. But he had made a promise, one he would keep so long as he had the strength in his body to do so. Then they left, with her body and the bodies of the slain, riding to Starfall and sending Tyrjet Lannister back to Casterly Rock after he was tended to by the Maester, enough to keep him alive for the journey, though he hadn't woken by the time he left upon the ship. Then, finally, he returned Dorne to the family to which it belonged, and then he returned north himself, Robert coming to Winterfell after he had recovered from his wounds for the burial of his betrothed in the crypts. He sighed and took his mind off the topic. Even now, so many years later, it still hurt to think about it. So, to keep his mind away from those thoughts, he turned to his trusted Maester as they walked and asked, "Have you met Robb's new mentor, yet? What do you think of him? It is best to think of the future and not the past. We cannot change what has already happened in our lives, no matter how much we might try, but we never know what tomorrow might bring." "I have, my lord," said Lewin with a wise smile and a nod. "He is certainly skilled in the ways of warcraft, especially as a strategist, but there are some odd things I have noticed, nothing bad, merely curious of him." He raised an eyebrow, curious as to the Maester's thoughts. "What do you mean?" "He seems to be an honest man to me. He will seem a little curious to us, but he is a Volunten. It is only natural since he comes from so far away. He keeps the old gods of the Valyrian pantheon, my lord, then at other times he speaks about the Freehold as if it were still around. But he has a very fine mind and is well versed in our history. He will be an excellent mentor for Robb, I am sure, but if I may ask, my lord, why did you hire a Volunten tiger to teach him?" "I thought it would be best for his tutor to have a different perspective of the world than Sir Roderick, that way he might learn a different way of seeing things as well as different strategies and tactics." The North had been friends with the Volantens for years, since the canal had been completed, but even before then the relations between the North and the Free Cities had been improving for years as the trade lanes between the North and Essos started to become more and more lucrative. The relationship between the Direwolf and the Tiger was one of gain for both parties, with ships sailing back and forth between the two realms often, bringing white sugar, exotic spices and soft silks to the North in exchange for silver, ice, beef and soap, to name a few of the most common goods found in the holds of the merchants that plied the routes between the North and Volantis. The North had great shipyards and skilled shipwrights to work in them, especially in White Harbor, where they were fed by timbers floated down from the Wolf's Wood on the back of barges and tar from the Neck. Every resources used to build and maintain a fleet were in abundance in the North and in the Narrow Sea. To have a fleet was to be powerful and dangerous, a force to be reckoned with. A fleet can raid a trade route and blockade a city if there are enough ships. The magisters of the narrow sea get their strength from their trade and their coin, not from their lands and the amount of people they have in service to them. They need fleets to keep their merchants safe, then they need them if they want to attack another magister. Even if they've built a fleet from sell sails, trade cogs and pleasure barges, they can still make another magister back down. Across the narrow sea, they had found another valuable trading partner in the merman, who had played a vital part in the completion of the canal with their knowledge of engineering and construction. Their great artisans bought great amounts of northern lumber, turning oak trees and ironwoods 100 years old into the most beautiful pieces of furniture in the known world, with a handful of their craftsmen even leaving MYR for whatever their reasons and buying passage across the narrow sea to start their lives anew in the north. The fact that they had chosen the north over any of the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms was a monument to the close friendship that existed between the north and MYR, as much a monument as the vast tracts of land the mermen had managed to claim in the divided lands, places where some of the lesser free cities had ceded their claims over the plots of land in favor of MYR, afraid to risk the ire of the sleeping direwolf across the narrow sea who had gained so much from a strong, prosperous MYR. The swordsmiths and armorers of Tioche had lukewarm relations with the north, buying some bronze for decorating their works and for making bronze statues to decorate their manses and villas, even helping to forge the great locks that made the canal possible, but they still weren't as favored as Bravos, nowhere near so. I am not happy about the north trading with slavers, but the Bravos are freemen, with goods from as far away as High. The Iron Bank is honorable, they will never break a deal they make, but they can try to find a way out of them if they do not like the terms. They want me to come to Bravos to make a withdrawal on the account, that way they could lower the interest rate down to the same as everyone else's. But not everyone across the narrow sea were on such good terms with his people. Lies had little to offer the north through trade, only poisons and other such evil things, nothing the north had much interest in aside from a few medicines for their masters to stock up on, but that alone hadn't made the north dislike them any more than they disliked any of the other free cities that the north had little trade with. It was the Lysan pirate Salad Horsaran who had, as he seemed to have the support of Lies. When Stannis Baratheon had gone to sea with the royal fleet to bring the pirate lord to justice, he had him cornered and trapped, only for him to flee into the free city under the protection of the Lysan fleet, who formed up between Stannis and Saladhor's flagship, blocking his path. Stannis would not risk starting a war by trying to press forward, so he had no choice but to return to port, grinding his teeth all the way back to King's Landing. His maester nodded in agreement. "It is always wise to learn from as many different places as we can, my lord. You can never know if one place was correct or not. I am certain he will teach even myself a few things about the freehold and his people." Eddard smiled at his maester. He had the task of teaching his children and his wards, a duty that he had done well, and Eddard always listened to his counsel. He was a wise and intelligent man, and Eddard thought that maybe one day, he might become the next Grand Maester. He has a link of Valyrian steel on his chain, for his study of magic and sorcery. It is the first I have ever seen. However, the Maester continued, "I am concerned Lady Adra. She has drank more moon tea in the last year than most women do in their entire lives, more than any woman should. I am running out of the ingredients to make more, my lord, though I should have enough for the time being." Eddard sighed. Everyone knew Adra's habits well enough, but she listened to no one about it, not even her brother when he simply encouraged her to slow down and was worried she might end up mothering a bastard. "She has almost used up all of the tansy again, hasn't she?" "No, my lord, it is the penna oil this time. I have only a third of a vial left. I have already sent for some more, but would you be willing to speak with her? She doesn't listen to anyone, even her brother and sister cannot persuade her to stop being so ravenous, but you might have better luck. She barely ever listens to me, but there is no harm in trying, I suppose. I doubt it will do any good. I have tried talking to her about this before, but it has never worked." "Is there anything else?" he asked as they walked out of his private room and out onto the hall, the door locking itself behind him. On the floor above was the bedchamber he shared with his beloved wife and his solar, which was larger and better equipped for meetings with other lords and the everyday affairs of running such a vast land, on the fourth floor of the keep with only the skies and battlements overhead. "I believe your third son has made a modest improvement," my lord Lewin said, referring not to Rickon but to Bran. "He has made some progress on his High Valyrian and his sums, but I fear he isn't driven enough in his studies. He sees few reasons to learn his numbers when he dreams of being in the King's Guard. But your eldest daughter is surprisingly well versed in her Valyrian. She must be practicing with Domeric. I believe so, my lord. She is certainly fluent in the language now, but she still needs some help on reading texts written in it. I plan to speak with Citizen Veneris about teaching her further, as all his texts are written in classic High Valyrian. That will help her learn even more. She probably knows more High Valyrian than I do. I only know enough to get my point across, but some in the north still speak the old tongue of the first men with skill. The Snowsticks pride themselves on it. They headed through the hallways of Winterfell, where the servants were already hard at work keeping the castle tidy, quietly talking amongst themselves as they worked about all manners of things, such as prices in the market or idle gossip. Even on the coldest and quietest days in Winterfell, the castle was alive with a life and activity that he had never managed to find in the grim silence of the Eyrie, a desolate, empty place high in the sky, never a true home for him even with Robert at his side as another brother and Jon Arryn as another father. During those few times whenever he returned to Winterfell, whether it be for great feasts or name days, it made him realize how much he longed for his true home when he left the bustling, lively capital of the north and returned to the silence of the Eyrie. There was never a moment of quiet in the castle where he was born, even on a quiet night in the midst of winter, where it was too cold for many people to work. There was still the sound of water rushing the pipes inside the walls and beneath the floors, a quiet ambience that was just another part of day-to-day life in the castle. There was the sound of children laughing and playing their games together, the hammering and hewing of the masons, carpenters and smiths who toiled together to keep the great castle in perfect condition. The rare cause of the golden eagles that made their nests wherever they could find the room and the distant sounds of people in the city, going about their lives as they always did, haggling over prices, talking with friends and family, shouting out prices and goods, with not even a hint of the scores who were quietly praying inside the city's godswoods. It was a place the Eyrie could never match, not in all the years he had spent there, so far from home as to feel like an exile. Even the den in Winterfell was a louder place than even the great hall of the Eyrie, where on a loud day there was the sound of wind rattling the moon door and little more. The mountain had made the castle impregnable, nigh impossible to take by storm, but it had torn out the Eyrie's heart and soul, taking away all the things that a castle should be and making it so remote from the rest of the Vale as to be desolate and empty, a withered husk. A familiar and friendly voice called out to him from a room on the side, a voice that made him smile to hear again. Ned. The old Seastook admiral walked over, smiling. I've been looking all over for you. Rickard Seastook was a large man, with a short bushy grey beard and thinning hair, but he still looked every inch the great sailor and admiral he had always been since his youth, the same man who told him and all the other boys and girls at Winterfell stories about the free cities and his travels around the known world, sneaking them treats of candied fruits and Volantin almonds, little almonds covered in sugar that came in every color imaginable, even when their own father thought it might be spoiling them. He was the uncle that Eddard had never had, with both Rickards being born in the same week, growing together as brothers at Winterfell alongside one another. Eddard knew that Rickard was like a grandfather to his children, doing to them what he had done to his generation, giving them treats whenever Eddard wasn't looking and telling them stories of distant lands and exotic creatures. I would never expect anything less of the old Seawolf. Like most of those born from the Stark stock, he had a long face and the grey eyes of their line, far wiser than they had been when Eddard had still been a young boy, but they still had the same determination and the same kindness they had so many years ago. He made no real attempt to dress well, but he truly looked the part of an admiral, wearing a blue and green doublet, that had a few pockets sewn in for whatever reason, with a good pair of breeches and hard-wearing leather boots and gloves. His grey hair only added to the look of him being a seasoned commander. Rickard, he smiled as he extended a hand towards his old friend. Good to see you again. What brings you so far from the sea? Rickard laughed as they shook hands. Is it that strange for me to be on dry land? He laughed again. The Elaine is in the Dree docks, they are careening the hull, putting on a fresh coat of tar and replacing some old timbers. Gods, he still has that ship. He was given that command when my father was the same age as Robb. The Elaine was a true warship, a galley of 2 decks built years ago from oak and ironwood, a northern creation with a few ideas taken from Braavosi and Volantin galleys to create a ship with a single purpose. Scores of scorpions bristled the decks, with spare parts kept in the holds below alongside a trained crew of carpenters who could mend any damage the ship took, whether it was caused by storm or battle. At the very front of the ship, with a fierce look on her face and her blade pointing into the distance, was a silver figurehead of Elaine Stark herself, the mother of the entire Seastock line, a woman who had left a legacy of life at sea to her children that they had kept alive long after she passed away. She had been one of the greatest admirals in the world in her day, putting a fear of the grey direwolf into the hearts of pirates and raiders, even being given lands of her own to raise a port on the northeastern shores, the Wolvesport, and founding her own branch of the Stark family years ago. But the Elaine was little like the ship it had been built as nearly 50 years ago. A half-deck had been added, making her a few inches bigger than the Dark Stark's flagship, the Golden Wolf, but that was only the start of the changes Ricard had made to the ship. A stronger and heftier ram had been put at the front, raising the ship's silver figurehead and namesake a little higher, after they replaced Lady Elaine's silver forearm and blade. The ship had been overbuilt through refit after refit, but it was now the oldest ship in the North's fleets and the proudest, too, with a long history of battles that few other ships could have ever sailed away from, tales of luck and triumph in the face of grim odds, starting from the Battle of the Stepstones during the War of the Ninepenny Kings, the same battle where Ricard's father was slain after his own command had been set ablaze after being rammed by a fireship and lost with all hands. But nowadays, it seemed the venerable warship was starting to spend more and more of her time in port for repairs that only grew longer and more expensive with every passing year. Ricard, it might be a good idea to take a new command. Ricard's friendly smile faded to a more serious scowl. The Elaine might be old, but she is mine. I can handle her better than any other ship, and gods, I love the old girl more than I love my wife. He sighed, then looked Eddard right in the eye as he added with all seriousness, she was my first command and God's willing, she'll be my last. Eddard looked back at him for a moment before giving the old admiral a solemn nod of respect. If that is what you wish, Admiral. But if you ever change your mind, come to me. I will pay for it from the coffers of Winterfell myself. Ricard started smiling again, the same smile he had when Eddard and his elder brother had first met him, before Lyanna had even been weaned. A generous offer, my lord, but it is one I must decline. I'll sail with Elaine even if I have to put new timbers in her bottom myself. But that's not what I came here to speak with you about. The Admiral reached into one of the pockets he had added onto his doublet and pulled out a piece of parchment, unfolding it carefully before passing it to Eddard, who looked at the paper curious as to what could cause the Admiral to come so far inland to speak with him. It was a charcoal drawing, a map of the Stepstones, with a path leading to them from further up the narrow sea, and in the center of the image were a small group of islands inside a circle. I took another pirate ship a few weeks ago. They were a long way from home, raiding the trade lanes between Myr and Pentos it would seem, said Ricard with a growing smile. They were on their own, and after I put a few scorpion bolts in their hull and torched their sails, they struck their colors and let themselves be boarded without a fight, but the captain, he tried to burn that map along with a dozen others and it cost him a hand. You know the location of their home port, then? I believe so, my lord, but there is more. I had seen his ship before, sailing alongside a war galley of 300 oars, each a different color. Eddard looked at the Admiral again, asking him to say more without uttering a single word. There's only one pirate galley with that many oars with that many colors. The Valyrian. Saladhor Saren is the greatest threat to our merchantmen, my lord. They call him the Prince of the Narrow Sea, but if you give me leave to attack his lair in the Stepstones, I'll make his reign a short one, and tow the Valyrian back as a prize, too. He could see the fire in the old Admiral's eyes, the desire to bring down the infamous pirate lord once and for all by attacking his lair, a chance to catch him in port and bring him to justice. I know of Saladhor Saren. He is a pirate lord, the worst in the world. Lies gives him harbor and refuge whenever we try to hunt his fleet down at sea, but if we catch him in his own lair while he is unloading his plundered goods, we might have a chance to put an end to him once and for all. Eddard nodded. Take as many ships as you need to put an end to his attacks, once and for all. Ricard grinned as the three continued to a stairwell, and the Admiral started listing what he would need. I will need 8 galleys and 12 hulks, all of them packed with sea wolves and 25,000 gold dragons to pay for sell sails, mercenaries and information. He knows exactly what he needs to win. Saren has a strong fleet, but some of his ships are trading cogs, not purpose-built warships. His men are pirates, they know how to fight at sea, but they do not have the weapons and armor of our sea wolves, or the training. I will make sure you have what you asked for, after I hold court. Once you have put to sea, go to King's Landing and ask the master of ships if he can loan any of his ships to help. A wise idea, my lord, added his maester. The Fury has 300 oars and should be an equal match for the Valerian, if the pirate manages to put his fleets to sea. He shouldn't be underestimated, the Sarans have been pirate lords for centuries. The Seastock Admiral nodded. You cannot bring too many ships to a battle. I'll ask him, but Stannis is like iron, he'll only go if the king tells him to, but if there's anything the stag likes, it's a fight. Robert might even join him in person, if he gets the chance. He always loved a good fight, like the one he had at Harrenhal when he fought against Arthur Dayne in the melee tournament. He smiled at the warm memory, where Robert had proudly strode into the melee, half a man and half a god as he took out a dozen men in the seven-sided tournament, till in the end it was only he and Arthur Dayne left standing. They had went at one another for over an hour till the great stag threw his weapon to the side and leapt at the sword of the morning and tackled him to the ground, unsheathing a blunt dagger as the two crashed against the ground in a heap. Dawn slipped from Arthur's grasp as the two men fought against one another tooth and nail, wrestling and hammering at one another with their fists and legs, but Robert was taller and stronger than the sword of the morning, half his age, too strong for Arthur to hold at bay forever. He had no choice but to yield the fight when Robert had his dagger in hand and sat on top of him, holding him down, but he limped away from the fight with 3 cracked ribs, holding his family's ancestral weapon as he walked off the field without asking for any help. I will send for Lord Darkstark to bring a few of his ships around, too. Ricard sighed in annoyance. I would rather not have him there, my lord. How come? Having his ships there fighting alongside yours would ensure that we would never lose the battle. He's a proud cunt, admitted the Admiral bluntly. That wife of his didn't help him with her Lannister pride. We've never gotten along, my lord. He's a fine admiral and a good lord to his people, but the bad part is he knows it. He was so proud of himself for having the largest ship in the north, that Golden Wolf of his, it cost him so much to have built, but when I refitted Elaine and made it a foot longer and a bit higher. The Admiral laughed lowly. That made him angry. Eddard shook his head and sighed to himself. They might hate each other, but they can do nothing against one another, they are kin with one another. Besides, while they might be rivals, their families are not. They walked down the stairs of the castle slowly, talking supplies and logistics, how the attack against the lair of the pirate lord would take place, then opened the door and stepped out of the stairwell and into the passageway behind the great hall, where he could already hear the sounds of his courtiers talking amongst themselves within, planning out their proposals and forming alliances and deals to give them more weight when trying to influence him. Controlling the north was far more complicated than any lordship in the south, simply because of how many wards he had. They were not just at Winterfell to learn and to become friends with one another, but to also represent the interests of their families without having to ride all the way from their holds, a journey on the road that could take up to a fortnight even with good weather. It meant that every decision he made could be weighed upon by people from each of the great noble houses of the north, even if they were only minor issues of little importance to most of the north. He was already dressed for the formal occasion, knowing that he was to hold court today, but he took a moment to inspect himself, to make sure that he was dressed perfectly. A lot could be learned just from the look a man, his father had always told him, and after adjusting his thick grey doublet ever so slightly, he stepped through the doors and into the great hall. Everyone in the hall fell silent as he stepped inside, taking their places in neat rows with the people who shared their issues. The battle lines are drawn. His footsteps echoed off the walls and rafters as he ascended the dais and took his place upon the throne in the center, looking down from high above on the gathered lords and ladies of his court, familiar faces all of them, people he knew well and knew how they would act. Ruling the north is a little different than what Jon Arryn tried to teach me. There is a balance of power between my vassals and I, and they work together to voice their objections so they have more influence in the court. It requires a gentle touch. Let us begin, he said firmly and loudly with his lordly voice, the sound being carried to the furthest reaches of the room. Robb and Jon stepped into the hall at the sound of his voice, Robb taking a position upon the dais on a lesser seat besides his father, so that he would learn how to run the court in his own right for the future. His eyes went over the gathered crowds, stopping when he saw Alice, and then he smiled at her, a smile that made her blush before returning one of her own. Young love. It was bound to happen sooner or later. He cannot be 5 and 10 forever. He will marry and have sons and daughters of his own, soon. Then Rob continued looking through the crowds after a moment and locked his gaze with Wyllerman Daly, who smiled back at him with a faint rosy blush of her own. But he is still a boy for now. It was clear that as Rob grew he started acting more and more like Eddard's own elder brother. He led the wolves of Winterfell, all of them deferring to him without so much as a single question otherwise when he told them what to do. It would make him an excellent leader whenever the time came, especially if most of the heirs of the North were used to listening to his commands, but he certainly had a fondness for the ladies of the court that went perhaps a little beyond just being polite, but that was the usual for a boy his age. Truly. I was the same when I went to Harrenhal for the tourney and saw Ashara Dane and Alyssa went. Gods, the ideas a young man can come up with. So long as he does not do something foolish like get both of them with child, there is no harm in him having feelings for them. His eyes went to Jon, who had taken a place in the crowds beneath the dais, not because he was a bastard, but because only the Lord, the heir and the Lady of Winterfell could sit on the dais, so neither Bran or Sansa could sit there, and he watched Rob's glances and for a moment it looked like he would laugh. Jon was friendly, a little teasing sometimes, certainly quick-witted, but all that only made him more like Benjen, the way he had been before he went to the wall anyway. He had gone because it had been his dream to take up the Black, even before he heard the recruiter at Harrenhal. Eddard had offered him lands in the north, the same lands that would have been his had Brandon become lord, but Benjen had turned them down, politely declining the maidens who were interested in him and then went north to the Night's Watch. Then there was Arya, who was his younger sister come again, in body and personality. She looked the same as his sister had at her age, the same wild grey eyes, the same messy brown hair, the same long face, and though she might not have looked beautiful yet, she would be one of the most beautiful women in the realm when she was older. There was never a question about it in his eyes. Everyone who had known Lyanna when she was the same age as Arya knew it, too, how they both had the same long face before they grew into their beauty. He had never been able to say no to Lyanna, and now it was just the same with Arya, so he let her have free rein to do whatever she willed, so long as she was safe. If she learns how to fight from Daisy Mormont, all the better. Catelyn might think wearing leathers and knowing how to fight is not something a lady should do, and even in the north it is uncommon, but I will not stop her from doing what she wants to do. The Mormont women are fine warriors, as brave and as honorable as any man. If that is what Arya wants to be, then I am happy to let her be that way. She is my daughter and I will love her however she acts. His lady wife stepped into the room and took her place on the dais besides him, sitting in a wooden throne of her own besides his as she shared a formal smile with her husband and nothing more, to keep up the lordly appearances and expectations of the court. They had learned so much from each other since they had been married. She had learned the realities of the North, what were myths and what were the truths, but the same had happened in reverse, too, with her teaching him much about a normal life in the South, something he hadn't properly experienced, even as a ward in the Eyrie. But the Eyrie is not a normal place, even in the South. She had been utterly lost in her first few years in the North, a Southron woman lost in the North's capital city, surrounded by strange people and strange customs. She had been taught so much about the North, but most of it was either half-truths, mistakes or outright made up. She had stayed inside the keep for nearly their first year of marriage, rarely letting the newborn Rob out of her arms, yet alone her sight. She had learned in her youth that there were a few cities in the north, yes, but she hadn't known that they were anywhere near as large as they actually were. She thought Winterfell was going to be closer to Gulltown in size, or maybe a large town that had been given the charter of a city for whatever reason, not the sprawling grand city that it actually turned out to be, where wargs practiced their arts openly and where it seemed to her that it snowed almost year-round. Her uncle Brynden had visited the north and told her everything he could about it, but there was only so much that he could see in the time that he had spent in the north, but it had helped her all the same. Now, she was truly settled into her role as the Lady of Winterfell, and what had been so shocking to her those many years ago had become just another part of her life, though he knew how hard she struggled with their children and the more extreme parts of northern life, like the cadet branches. That is the hardest part for her. She had been taught by a Septa for years how her children, boy or girl, would act and how she could get them to do what she wanted, but what works in the south might not work in the north. Then Sansa walked in, openly holding hands with her beloved Domeric before letting go and standing beside him, perfectly accustomed to a life at the court of Winterfell. She was no fragile flower, she was a true lady of the north, a direwolf to the core, as hard and as beautiful as a sculpture carved from ice and with a demeanor that could only be described as regal. She had no shortage of love for the people around her, perfectly polite and always caring, leading the ladies who had come to Winterfell by example when she could and always looking after her friends and those who came to her for advice. Sansa had been thrown into the task of looking after and leading the ladies who came to Winterfell as wards, but it had only made her stronger, even if it had caused her to grow up before her time. It was no wonder then that so many people tried to win her heart, but they had all failed to pry her from the one man she truly loved. She could be a queen if she wanted to, a mother to a king and to princes and princesses. But she would never want it, not if she has to marry someone other than her beloved Domeric. After a few moments of organization, his herald introduced the first person, and thus issue, of the day. Ravens flew back and forth from Winterfell often, but even more often were messengers from the great lordships of the north, bringing messages to the people they had at Winterfell, telling them about the happenings of their homelands, and more importantly, telling them how they could help their home and what to suggest whenever he held court. The Honourable Tigett Darkstark, speaking on behalf of his Lord Father Bern Darkstark, Lord of the Darkport. The young nobleman stepped away from where his sisters were and stood before the dais. He was 7 and 10 years old, but it wouldn't be long before his next name day and he was already a man grown in his own right. Tigett was not as good an admiral as the other men of his family, but he had his namesake's skill at arms and always enjoyed some friendly practice with the other boys, never turning down a challenge. He was as brave as any wolf or lion and he was only ever truly alive when in the company of his friends, never liking to be left on his own for too long. Like a vein of gold buried deep in the earth, he had a few streaks of his mother's golden blonde in his otherwise stark brown hair, with a drop of green in his grey eyes. He tried hard to keep his sisters out of trouble, especially Adra, but she was an uphill battle and Lion never went into any situation that could result in something bad happening in the first place. He was dressed from head to heel in the black and orange of his house, with the Lannister lion that was quartered with the orange direwolf above his heart in the same color as the rest. "My lord," he said with a formal bow, "my father has come up with an idea that will make our fleets invincible." He is saying the words his father wrote for him on the letter. Tigett smiled to the crowd, who whispered amongst themselves, wondering what his father's plan was, and even Rickard Seastook's interest was piqued. As you all know, the wood of a wood tree never rots. Not even a dragon can burn it. Harrenhal proved that, and as it ages it grows harder and stronger, not weaker, as it starts to turn into something as hard as iron. My father believes that we should plant 1,000 wood trees, and in a century's time they will be large enough to be used to construct a fleet of ships that could never burn and could serve in our fleets forever. I like the idea of unsinkable ships as much as you do, lad, spoke the admiral in reply, but wood trees are sacred. You can't just cut them down and make them into ships, else we'll be as vile as Black Harren, and we all know what happened to him. I'm afraid that is where you wrong, Admiral. Heart trees are sacred, my father and I would never think of damaging one, but not every wood tree is a heart tree. These trees would be grown solely to be made into hulls and timbers and would never have a face. Have you asked the green men about this? Asked Eddard. I will not allow any woods to be cut down, not without their permission for each and every one. If the choice is to have a fleet of powerful warships, or to commit such an atrocity and damn ourselves, then it is no choice at all. Before Tigett could reply, Daisy Mormont spoke, arms crossed. The Andals cut down most of the woods in the south, using them to make bows and shields and so on, but you never hear of any wood ships in the stories. The squids don't have any of them either, and if there was anyone who would want unbreakable ships, it would be them. Maester Lewin replied, it could be that they did exist long ago and have since been lost. An unbreakable ship is one that can still sink in a storm, should water get inside and flood the holds, or they could have been broken up and turned into other things when there was no longer a need for them at the time. The Maester paused before continuing. However, I have never read of any wood ships in my books, or been told of them by any of my tutors at the Citadel. My kin go on hunts north of the wall when they can, hunting shadow cats, mammoths and elks, too, added Donal Snowstock. The wildlings use bows and spears made from wood, and the green men go up there and meet them in peace. Let me send a message to my family for the next time they go there, my lord. Let them find a wood without a face and cut off one of its branches, then they can give it to the shipwrights and see if they can make part of it float. You can't build a ship with one branch, said Ricard. Just throw a piece of it into the water and see if it floats. If it doesn't, then you can't build a ship out of it. He smiled at the court, then looked to his liege lord. It works with rocks, I don't see why it wouldn't work for a small piece of wood. We will not wound a wood just to see if part of it floats, Admiral. Donal, send a message to your family, see if you cannot get them to barter for a wood bow or spear from the wildlings. That way, we can see how well it floats without having to harm the gods ourselves. Then if it floats, we will ask the green men if cutting down a wood tree without eyes is an affront to the gods, and only then will we start planting woods, and only with their permission. That sounds reasonable, my lord. Tidjet smiled. I will tell my lord father as soon as I can. He bowed again and walked to the side beside his sisters again, the three talking amongst themselves quietly as the herald introduced the next person to have something on the agenda. Lady Wyler Mandaily, representing her father the Honourable Lord Wyman Mandaily, Lord of White Harbour. She smiled at Eddard and then did a curtsy before speaking. My lord, my father is one of your most loyal and capable bannermen and has helped keep pirates away from the canal in his duties as Warden of the White Knife. It was his fleet, alongside that of yours, Admiral. She smiled at Ricard fondly, that broke the blockade of Storm's End and allowed that man with his ship full of onions to start resupplying the castle. Ricard smiled back at the young lady. Oh, they didn't even try to fight us anyway. They broke off at the sight of our sails, there were just too many ships on our side for them to risk fighting. Indeed, and it is because of White Harbour's many shipyards that the North has such a powerful fleet as to route the Red Wines without a battle. It is with all that in mind that my father would humbly request for White Harbour to be given the status of a staple port. Many of the traders who come down the White Knife unload most of their goods at White Harbour anyway, so it won't make any real difference other than making it official. Making White Harbour a staple port will give the Mandaelis a great amount of power. Anyone who sails down the White Knife would have no choice but to stay in White Harbour for a time to offer their goods for sale, probably at a price good for the merchants of the city, too. Rob spoke quietly from beside him. Father, I don't see any harm in strengthening our most loyal bannermen. If most of the traders already offload most of their goods there, then this seems like a simple choice. It is more complicated than you might think, Rob, he replied. Being the Lord of Winterfell is not just about balancing the power of our vassals, but also about looking after the needs of our people, great and small. He turned back to Wyler and declared, you will have your staple port privileges, but you will allow the traders of the White Knife to pay a small fee to your Lord Father instead of putting their goods up for sale. She smiled widely at Eddard, and of course, his son and heir. Thank you, my lord, that is more than adequate. But there is another issue I have to raise. She sighed sadly as she began to plead to the court. The White Knife, which marks our borders with House Waterman to the west, the river has shifted eastwards, and a number of villages stand on their side of the river. Those were our lands, but the Lord Waterman claims that since the river marks the border, they belong to him now. The sheer emotion in her voice, that she might burst into tears at a moment's notice, drove the lords and ladies of the court into an uproar. She had quickly learned the ways of the court at Winterfell, the game of charters, wards, privileges and friends, but she had certainly become quite good at it, too. I'll defend the claims of House Mandaily in a trial by arms if need be, my lady offered Tidjet Darkstark, standing straight and proud, Lion objecting quietly before sighing and looking to the ground in defeat. I will too, let Lord Waterman choose his weapons and champions, echoed Torrhen Karstark, stepping forth. Eddard Karstark took one glance at his brother and followed. If Toy is in, so am I. 7 against 7. As am I, spoke Rob from beside him with a steely resolve. Jon, are you coming too? Before Jon could give his obvious answer, Wyler smiled at them all before saying with relief, I thank all of you, but there's no need for bloodshed, so long as our good Lord Stark makes Lord Waterman reconsider. There will be no killing over this matter. The borders between the lands of Houses Waterman and Mandaily will remain as they have always been and not follow the movement of the river, no matter what might have caused it to shift. His voice made the entire court fall back to silence and let the brash young men who had stepped forth to defend her honor and the honor of her family, none of whom were older than 20 years, head back to where they were stood. I know the people inside the walls of Winterfell far better than anyone else, what choices they will make. Lord Waterman would back down if the Mandaelis asked, but Wyman wants me to make a ruling to stop him from getting any ideas about making any claims at all. Wyler smiled at him again, grateful. Thank you, my lord. She bowed and then stepped into the sides with the men who had been willing to fight for her, having accomplished everything she had set out to do at this meeting of the council. Next is the Honourable Domeric Bolton, heir to the Dread Fort and representing the interests of his father, the Honourable Lord Roose Bolton. Domeric stepped forward dressed in the pink leathers of his family, with a pink cloak of satin cloth fastened by a screaming head of silver. The Boltons had long given up their old way of flaying their enemies, but had turned to butchering cows instead of people, producing the finest leather works in the entire Seven Kingdoms from the hides of furred cows, giving their once nightmarish words a new and innocent meaning. He bowed deeply before the throne before speaking. My lord, the lands of my parent house have blossomed ever since we set aside our differences and swore fealty to Winterfell. Never before has the land been so productive and peaceful, the people so wealthy and well-fed, or the Dread Fort as strong as it is now. There has been nothing but peace and prosperity since we knelt, and though the relations between houses Bolton and Stark might not have always been as great as they could have been, they have always mended together and we have always answered the calls of Winterfell whenever they needed our swords. The Dread Fort is the third greatest city in the north, with only White Harbor and Winterfell ahead of it, but we lack the right to call it a proper city. Your father chose against giving us a proper city charter. No, he gave us a charter that called the Dread Fort a grand town rather than the small city it really is. We have few of the privileges that a true city should have. We cannot allow the creation of guilds, set our own tax rates inside the walls or even to give our own guards the privilege to carry out the law. He sighed. I humbly request on the behalf of my father that you rectify this bizarre error, and give us the privileges to reflect our true position inside the north. The words of the Bolton heir rekindled an old memory, from before his 10th name-a-day. My sons, the Boltons might complain about not having the right to give their own guards the right to pass sentences, but there is a reason for this. What is it? Asked his elder brother. All three of them sat before a hearth in his father's solar to keep warm as their mother gave birth in another room in the castle. You see, Brandon, the Boltons have rebelled against Winterfell before, even after swearing fealty, but we have always helped them back on their feet. If we didn't, no one would ever surrender to us. But keeping our men who have their first loyalty to Winterfell and to the Starks, not to the Boltons, in positions of command in the city watch of the Dread Fort means that they could dismantle his household should he ever raise his banners against Winterfell again. All we would have to do then is to ride to the Dread Fort with our retainers to deliver justice. But Lord Bolton knows about these people, that they are loyal to Winterfell first and foremost, but it is a warning. As much a warning to him about the reach of Winterfell as the cadet branches near him, who are loyal to Winterfell. Blood is thicker than water, oh yes, and what is a dire wolf without their pack to stand by their side? When the white winds blow and the days grow long, my sons, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Father would know what to do. He always did. You will have your noble privileges, in recognition of the loyal service of your family over the recent years, as well as the growth of your lands. Let it be known that the Dread Fort is no longer a town, but a true city of the north, in the eyes of men and the law. You will have your guilds and your own right of taxation, but the right to give your guards the privilege to carry out death sentences will be held from you for the time being, till the people of the Dread Fort adjust to their new status as a city, however long that might take. Domeric smiled at him. I am pleased to know that the father of my beloved is a reasonable man, my lord. He bowed once again. I am sure my father will be happy at the splendid news. He walked back to his place beside Sansa, holding hands with her again when they stood beside one another. They love one another. I see no reason to stop the Boltons from earning those rights, not when they are going to be one of our closest allies in the years to come. We might have quarreled with them a lot, but that was a long time ago. Now, they are a true part of the North, and if Sansa still loves him when she comes of age, then I will welcome Domeric into my family as my good son and his father as my good brother. But how will I know when to give them the right of justice giving? That should be tied to the size of his city, but no one knows for certain the exact population of their city and holdings, or the North as a whole even. The last census is too old to help, and the only one before that was done by Aegon the Conqueror when he stopped burning the realm and started running it. The North had grown drastically since the days of Egon the Conqueror, thanks to Torrhen Stark and his bastard brother finding the furred cows, but no one knew for certain how many people were in the North. They only had a rough idea based off of the amount of taxes the North took in each year. But everyone knew that northern families were large. They had always been large, food was plentiful, but land was even more so. The North was as big as the rest of the 7 kingdoms combined, but if it only had the population of the Reach, which his ledgers seemed to say, then there was still a vast amount of land for future growth. Centuries of peace and prosperity had made the North grow strong, and it would have been even stronger had it not been for the great spring sickness that had slaughtered the young and strong and the old and frail alike, with the strongest men feeling fine in the morning and being on their deathbed by the evening. The North's size and the cold had stopped it from spreading as easily as it could have, but some villages were utterly wiped out by the plague, like candles being snuffed out by a winter wind. The disease had made its way deep into the heartlands of the North, spreading from White Harbor, even reaching Winterfell where it killed a great many people, but the wargs of the City Watch realized that their animals couldn't be affected by the spreading disease, so it fell to them to bury the dead with their bears and shovels. It took the North years to recover from the pestilence, but it had recovered. The ledgers showed the drop of income in the areas most affected by the disease, where it had taken a deadly toll, but before long the North was growing once again at speed, like an avalanche of births, one that had continued to the present day and showed no sign of even beginning to slow. No, it was only growing faster and faster, more and more people having more and more children, filling in the empty spaces of the North and taking the place of those who had died in the plague, even the Lord of Winterfell, who had caught the disease and been slain by it. But after that, there had been a short and furious winter. Of course, it hadn't been all that severe, since the granaries had been stocked for more people than were actually alive when winter came. Having such a winter and the plague had thrown off the last census even more, some of the towns it referred to as being bustling settlements simply didn't exist anymore, being wiped out in the plague or being abandoned because of the winter, and places where it said there were only villages and hamlets had turned into market towns after the refugees of the plague-stricken settlements had arrived, or at least, those who had been able to live through the journey from one town to the next. Trying to use that census is pointless, now. I should have another made, count every man, woman and child in the North, how much land they own, how many animals they keep, but this has been a long summer and winter is coming. I will send my men out to count after the spring has arrived, as this summer could come to an end soon, so it would be best to wait, rather than risk having them traveling when the blizzards begin. The courtly herald looked at his list, then he announced for all to hear, "My lords and ladies, there have been a number of noble births this past year. On behalf of their noble mothers and fathers, I introduce the following children to the court of Winterfell, so that they might be known." He began listing off names and their houses, one by one. The little Drold Mormont, born only a few weeks ago in the waning days of the year 297 since Aegon's conquest, the third son and fourth child of the Honourable Lord Mormont, Lord of Bear Island, and his lady wife Lioness Hightower. He must be named for the White Bull, a worthy and honourable name for a boy. Edara Magna, born in the first days of the year of 297 since Aegon's conquest, first daughter and first child of the Honourable and young Lord Artos Magna, Lord of Skagos, and his lady wife Lyra Krell. They have nothing but the blood of the first men in their lineage. Eddard Flint, born halfway through the year, first son and second child of the Honourable Lord Robin Flint, Lord of Flint's Finger and his lady wife, Elaine Greystoke. Eddard Greystoke, born 3 moons ago in the year 297 Aegon's conquest, first son and sixth child of Lord Brandon Greystoke, Lord of Greyston and his lady wife Jane Marndaly. He saw the little Lady Lyra look down at the ground sadly when she heard her father's title, or rather the lack thereof, only 6 and already knowing what it meant. In the North, it was customary for every lord to first be addressed by calling them based on the standing of their honor, like a title, but since the Greystokes had risen against Winterfell so long ago, they were no longer allowed to be addressed as the Honourable anymore, not till they redeemed their honor, something they tried day and night to do. By being seen in poor standing amongst the lords of the North, it was a lot harder for them to get good marriages, their word was valued less highly and they had to pay so much more for the dowries of their maidens. They had been so eager to try and redeem themselves in the eyes of the northern lords that Lord Brandon's elder brother, the original heir to Greyston, had ridden at his elder brother's side only to be slain in King's Landing. Then the second brother of their line had died in the rebellion in the Battle of the Bells. They broke the vows of fealty they swore in the eyes of gods and men and turned against their kin, slaying their own blood, but they have labored long and hard to wash out that crime. I would count them as one of Winterfell's most loyal supporters, but I cannot say if their crimes have been forgiven and their honor restored. It is up to the lords of the north whether they have been. Jane Marndale is a good marriage for them, though. One of Sir Marlon Marndale's daughters. They are starting to be forgiven, at long last. Eddard Reed, born in the later half of the year of 297 since Aegon's conquest, second son and third child of Lord Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch and his lady wife Gianna Blackmire. Another Eddard. Eddard and his twin brother Edric Seastock, born 4 months before today in the year of 297 since Aegon's conquest, first and second sons and second and third children of the Honourable Beric Seastock, heir to the Wulvesport with his lady wife the fair Walder Frey. He married her for the dowry, muttered Rickard quietly. Stupid boy, you can get more gold, you can't get a new wife. And finally, Caitlin Glover, born on the very start of this year, of 298 since Aegon's conquest, first daughter and second child of the Honourable Lord Robert Glover, Lord of Deepwood Motte and his lady wife Sybil Locke. His wife smiled. It seems I have a namesake, my lord, she said as she smiled at Eddard. Though not quite as many as you. It seems like half the boys in the north are named after me, my lady. I cannot see why, though. My father was a better lord than I, and my brother was raised for it. You cannot have done that poorly, husband, if so many people in the north are naming their sons for you. She gave him a smile he knew very, very well. Perhaps if we have another child, another son, I will name him for you, too. Oh, my lord, said the court's herald. There's one more name, added by the green men it would seem. Ned, of the Stone Crows clan in the Vale, born sometime last year, the 297th since Aegon's conquest, a son of Shagger, who is the son of Dolph, chief of the Stone Crows, and, they are not sure who his mother is, my lord. Eddard sighed. Not only did the clans in the Vale know who he was, calling him the Ned or the Stark like the clans of the north, but they were naming their sons after him, too. He knew that even the wildlings knew who he was, but that wasn't that surprising, they were close, separated only by the wall. But the clans of the Vale were far away from the north, they probably didn't know who the king on the Iron Throne was, if they knew what the Iron Throne was at all. And yet they know my name. I suppose they must have learnt of it from the green men when they were tending to their woods. Are there any more names? No, my lord. Then I will bring today's session of court to a close, unless there are any other issues to be discussed. The court remained quiet, no one stepping forth or raising their voices to bring forth a new discussion, but talking amongst themselves all the same about the results of the few proposals and discussions of the day. There's nothing more to be done, but there are usually far more discussions than this. Finally, after he was sure no one was going to bring forth anything else, he finished court and then rose from his throne, being followed out of the great hall of Winterfell by his sons and daughters, leaving the rest of his household to go about their day in peace. Then, when they were in the hallways of Winterfell again, he asked his eldest daughter, "Where's your sister?" "She's having a nap," Sansa replied. Or at least, that's what Daisy said. Robb and Jon talked amongst themselves before heading outside, with their sister following, leaving only Eddard and his lady wife in the halls. "Rickon is asleep too, Ned," she said with a smile that showed her obvious love for the youngest Stark. "He wanted to see you, too." Eddard smiled back at his wife. Their children were more than just heirs and spares for Winterfell, or daughters to be married away. They were children that had sprang from a marriage of love, and he loved each and every one of them, there never being a moment when he didn't. "I haven't been able to spend much time with him lately, not as much as I would like." They headed to the steps, starting to ascend to the top floor where their rooms and his solo was. "He misses you a lot," Ned, his wife, sighed. He put an arm around her, able to let down the lordly look he kept in front of the court and in public. "Then there will be no court tomorrow. I will spend the entire day with my sons and daughters, all of them, especially Rickon. What is the point in being a lord if I cannot spend time with the ones I love?" "The north is so different than the south," said his wife as they climbed the steps together. "I was taught by my Septa that my husband would love our children, but, never as much as you love ours, or as much as you love me. Not all the lords of the north love their wives or their sons and daughters, but many of them do. Most meet the ladies of the north for the first time at Winterfell, when they are younger than Robb. It gives them time to bond with each other, even fall in love with one another before getting married. A marriage of love makes more children. I would hope so. She gave him the smile again, and he knew full well what was on her mind. He smiled back at her. Then they started heading up the stairs a bit quicker. Oh, and Ned, what was that look Robb gave to Alis and Wyler? Do you remember the tournament at Harrenhal? She slowed down her climb and nodded. Do you remember when I saw Ashara and Alyssa went? During the feast. She looked back at him curiously for a moment, then she laughed. It was the same as the one Robb gave. It is something a boy thinks about when they are at that age. He is seeing the ladies around him with a different look for the first time. He won't be a boy forever. His wife accepted. He'll marry and have sons and daughters of his own. He will, but there are still a few years before then, my wife. Brandon dreams of being in the Kingsguard, Sansa the Lady of the Dread Fort, Arya. Ned, Arya is wild, she'll never be tamed, by any man his wife sighed again. I don't want to see her married off to someone she doesn't like. She doesn't have to marry, Catelyn. If she doesn't want to marry, to have sons and daughters of her own, she doesn't have to. His wife looked at him sadly, a tear on her cheek. But that is what being a lady is. Having children, looking after them and raising them. If she stays the way she is, no man will ever love her. She will never know what it feels like to hold her own sons and daughters in her arms, to hear them call her mother, to be loved. He embraced his wife, wrapping his arms around her and holding her close. Catelyn, my beloved wife, you never know what tomorrow might bring. Sansa wasn't much different when she was young, but she grew out of it, he comforted. Arya will be one of the most beautiful women in the world when she comes of age. Men will try long and hard to claim her hand. Maybe some prince will ride up on his horse and win her heart. He swallowed. Maybe, but we must love her, whatever she wants to make of her life. She squeezed him, placing her head against his chest. I sent a raven to the Eyrie, to my uncle. I hope he comes here, Ned. I don't know what to do with our children. They are just so different than what I was raised to expect. He smiled at her again, smiling for her, to lift her heart and mood. I will hold a feast for him when he comes, for Lysa and her son too, if she comes along with him. There's no need to worry about our children, my wife. They love you just as much as you love them, even if they might not show it as often as they should. But they are so against what I was raised, all of them, except Sansa. She sighed. Ned, is Sansa like me? Instantly he answered, she is exactly the same as you. She talks like you, she walks like you, she dances and smiles and laughs like you. She acts like you, if you were from the north. How did I never see it, Ned? She is like me, the way I was when I was young, but I never realized, not till Lion told me. Sometimes we never see the things right in front of us, even if they are as obvious as the sun. She smiled at him, and he swept her off her feet and into his arms. He had aged since the rebellion, but he still had plenty of strength in him, even if part of his beard might have been starting to turn grey. She laughed in surprise as he carried up the steps, one at a time. Ned. What if someone sees us? There is no woman I have ever loved as much as you, Catelyn, and I am not afraid to let the people of Winterfell see it. She smiled at him, holding on to him tightly as he ascended the steps. If this is what being a woman of the North is like, to be loved so much, I never want to go south again, Ned. Winterfell is my home, even if it is nothing like Riverrun. Catelyn, do you think we will have another child? She smiled at him again and nodded with a glance towards her middle. I hope so, Ned. Our children might confuse me at times, but they have brought me nothing but happiness. I would like another boy or another girl, it doesn't matter which. He smiled as he rose onto the floor where their bedchamber was. His arms ached from carrying her for so long. He was certainly not as strong as he used to be, but he refused to put her back onto her feet, not so close to her room. I will be damned if I cannot carry her from the ground floor to the bedchamber. I am not a greybeard just yet. He laughed as they came upon the first true obstacle. A closed door. Caitlin held on to him even more tightly than before with one arm, reaching out with the other and barely managing to open it. He didn't put her down even as the ache in his arms grew worse and more painful. He carried her to the door of their bedchamber and had her open it, then carried her inside and finally lay her down upon their bed in the middle of the room. She had a room of her own, decorated to her own tastes, but they only ever shared one, ever since the earliest days of their marriage. Her auburn hair flowed freely over the bed as she looked back at him with her beautiful blue eyes, waving for him to come over as she began unfastening the laces of her dress. "We only have till dinner," he said. She smiled back at him. "A good thing beef takes a long time to cook, then." Asterisk 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 asterisk. Notes. The North is a lot more powerful, but with that power has come a lot of extra responsibilities for the Lord of Winterfell. Eddard Stark has to be able to handle sums and numbers, large ones, so that he can check the ledgers himself and ensure that the entire North is running smoothly and that he isn't being swindled by anyone deliberately cutting their tax payments low. It is something his father taught him, as the back and forth between Casterly Rock, Highgarden and Winterfell meant that it took a little longer for him to end up being sent to the Eyrie, as he really did believe he might have gone to one of the other two places. Oh, he still likes Robert and Jon Arryn, but he has known them for a little less time than in canon and spent more time with the rest of his kin, visiting for feasts, name-a-days and other special occasions like that, so Eddard himself has a little less of the Arryn values and more of the Stark ones, a little bit closer to the way they were. He's still the Honorable Ned Stark, that's for sure, but he has an understanding of why some things are the way they are, like why his father kept a tight leash on control of the Dread Fort's watch, so that if Roose rebelled, he could have him killed or at least slow down his organization in time for Winterfell to march on them. And having cadet branches all over the place serves as an excellent example of who could replace any rebelling lord. With Winterfell being so much busier and more lively than ever before as the nerve center of a continent-sized realm, there is a private room for the Lord of Winterfell, not his solar of course, but something quite similar, a place for him to retire to whenever he craves a little peace and quiet. Those books are the North's history as written by the Lords of Winterfell, not by the Maesters, with a different point of view, and it was where his father came up with his plans. Eddard still doesn't know for certain what Rickard Stark was planning, even after all these years and after reading all his journals, but he has been trying to figure it out for years, trying to understand whatever Rickard had been planning to do. And of course, the increased wealth of the North means that they've got much larger cash reserves than in canon, having several million in total. They are nowhere near as wealthy as the Westerlands, who themselves are quite a bit richer than in canon thanks to the canal, but they've got more stored away than the Reach in case of a long and costly winter. That comes from the money the Reach would spend on things like musicians, mummers and tournaments. Then across the sea, they have a large reserve with the Iron Bank, though the bankers have been trying to find a loophole to get out of the deal that had almost been forced on them by one of the Starks of old. But the only way they have out of it is if the Eddard removes some money from the account, something he has no desire to do, as each year a little bit more money from the bank's loan deals goes back to the account and adding on to the emergency reserve of House Stark. The North doesn't keep the faith, so they have no qualms about usury, not even considering it a moral problem whatsoever, and they've learned a lot more about managing money from the merchants across the narrow sea. Of course, no one in Westeros knows what inflation is yet, but they know of interest and the like. The North's relations with the Free Cities are rather good, especially with Braavos, Myr and Volantis, who benefit the most from a healthy, strong North. The help of the Free Cities was vital to the completion of the North's Canal, as it basically brought Valyrian engineering to the project. We know the Valyrians of canon were good at engineering anyway, since they built things like the bridge at Volantis, not to mention the Black Walls. Their knowledge was needed to finish the project, but so was the metallurgy of Tiosh, needed to forge the locks and other mechanisms necessary to actually bring the canal to life, with the wooden cranes taking the role of the giants, though they were less efficient than those massive men and women. However, not all of the Free Cities are friendly with the North, only the ones where the benefits of mutual trade outweigh the North's hatred towards slavers. With Myr and Volantis, that has definitely occurred, but with Lies, certainly not. They and the North are not friends, certainly not, but they are not looking to try and start a war they know they cannot win. Volantis and Myr not only wouldn't back them up, but would probably attack them at the side of the North as a land grab. They are walking a very fine line and they know it. Chapter 9, Viceroy. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Pentos, the waning weeks of 297 AC. Viserys looked out across the glistening red waters of the bay from the balcony, a gentle breeze coming in from the narrow sea to the manse of the man who had taken him and his sister in, the wealthy Magister Iliomapatis, who desired to see Viserys seated upon the Iron Throne. Though he obviously wants something in return for his hospitality, but I am a generous king. When I take back my throne, I will give him the cost of our stay 100 times over. Ships glided across the lazy waters as they pulled into port, offloading goods from across the known world. Spices and herbs from the summer islands, paper from Yeti, furs and ivory from the north and gold from the westerlands, all of it came to Pentos, where many of the great magisters of the narrow sea made their residence, though many more went on to trade at Braavos instead, the city that had forced a bitter peace upon the Pentoshi. Still, Pentos was a powerful city, even if it had been eclipsed by Myr to the south, Braavos to the north or Volantis to the east. He looked across the waters to the west, dreaming of the lands that awaited beyond the horizon, Westeros, the Seven Kingdoms, the lands of the Andals, the Rhoynar and the First Men, a land of lords and ladies, knights and castles, kings and queens. It was his realm, even if it had been stolen from him by the usurper, the damned stag who had murdered his brother and endorsed the slaughter of his kin, who had stolen what his ancestors had created with blood and fire centuries ago. But more than that, he dreamed of home. The familiar stones and towers of the Red Keep, where the great throne of twisted steel forged together in the breath of a dragon, the Iron Throne, his throne, stood tall and proud, the very symbol of what had been the greatest feat of his family, the welding of many realms, each strong and fierce in their own right into one realm with one king. Just as the different blades had been melted into one seat, so had the different kingdoms of Westeros been made into one. He wished to hear his brother play his harp again, to have his father give him a sweet forgetting all the names of the dragons right, to feel his mother's gentle hug. He wished to wake up from this nightmare and see them again, gathered at the table breaking their fast as things had been years ago. But I will never see them again. Rhaegar was slain upon the Trident, the royal army crushed, my father murdered by a traitor in his own guard, and mother. He sighed sadly, remembering how cold she had been after the birth, the silence that had been broken only by his sister's cries for a mother she would never know. I have done what you asked, mother. I have kept her safe, just as you made me promise. I will bring her home. She might not know what home is, she never knew the Red Keep, but I will have her at my side when I return to the Red Keep. She might be afraid of me at times, but I have to be stern, I have to be strong for her, to stop her from forgetting what we have to do and what we are. The first few years after the war had been the hardest. His sweet loving mother had given birth to his little sister in the midst of a naval battle with the Wolf's fleet, the Royal Navy fighting one last battle while outnumbered 3-1 to get their family to safety in Braavos, where their family kept their own manse, a place for them to retreat to or to stay whenever they were touring the free city, but she had never lived to make it there. His father had sent them both to Dragonstone to stay safe, away from the tides of war, in case the worst should happen, but when the traitors rose and put their fleets to sea, the Tyrells switching sides after his gentle niece and her innocent baby brother had been slaughtered in the capital, turning against those who had given them their titles in the first place 3 centuries before, they had no choice but to leave their ancestral fortress as quickly as possible, lest they be cornered and butchered just as the rest of their family had been after King's Landing fell to his father's most trusted friend. They had stayed in Braavos, protected by the last of his father's loyal and true men, till the Sea Lord of Braavos objected to their presence and demanded they leave, else he arrest them and give them over to the Seven Kingdoms so that they could face the stag's judgment. They had no choice but to leave, with that band of loyal men, a dozen of them, and slowly but surely, they lost them, one at a time, whether deserting from his side for a pardon from across the narrow sea or to go soldiering on their own, or being slain defending them from the usurper's bloodthirsty killers till in the end it was only himself and his sister, one step ahead of Robert Baratheon's knives, running from city to city, from magister to magister for hospitality. He spent what little coin he could scrounge together on food, always feeding her before he fed himself, making sure she was as comfortable and as happy as he could make her, just as he had promised Rolla, even if it meant he went without food himself. He taught her everything he knew, teaching her how to read and write just as his maester had taught him years before, telling her about the history of their family and who she was. Teaching her everything he knew, taking the first watch as she slumbered beside him, vowing to keep her safe, just as he had promised their mother. My father was a good king, mother told me so. He kept the peace in Westeros, he filled the coffers with gold and the people cheered his name, but our lords betrayed us and those who were meant to be our allies turned their backs against us. Why? Why did they abandon us when we needed them most? He steeled himself. When he returned to Westeros, when the people rose up and the dragon banners flew proudly once again, he would wipe the court of King's Landing clean, remove the stain upon pride and glory of the Iron Throne that the usurper had made, and then he would turn his eyes to those who had betrayed his family. We raised the Tyrells up high, but that only means they have further to fall. When I return, I will burn Highgarden to the ground and salt the fields around it as a warning to the rest of my lords as to what will happen to those who dare to defy their rightful ruler ever again. I will make the traitor lords suffer as I have, I will strip them of their lands and banish them into exile across the narrow sea, so they can learn what it is like to see everything one has ever loved taken from them. He longed to see justice done, to see the wrongs that they had committed against his family set right again, to bring his sister home to a place she could be safe and happy, where they could be safe and happy, but that only made what he had to do all the worse. I am sorry, sweet sister, I will do what I must to take us home. The man who had gave him more hospitality than he had known in years came over to his side, smiling. Illyrio was a large man in more than one way, tall and strong in his youth, now tall and as fat as a whale, wearing thick perfumes that tried in vain to make him smell more like a flower bush rather than the sweating heap of fat he really was. But he has a good heart, I am sure, if he is willing to help me and my sweet sister when no one else would. My king, he addressed formally, looking towards your lands, I see. I am. Thanks to you, I will be seeing them again soon. Viserys smiled at the Magister, who was going to help him reclaim his birthright. When I take back my throne, I will give you any reward you might want. My king, that is very generous of you. But I wish no more than for the glory of being your master of coin, so that I might serve a just and honest ruler. Seeing you upon the throne is a reward in its own right, your grace. He grinned at the Magister. Then you will get your reward, when I am crowned. How is my sweet sister? Does she know what we have planned? Illyrio nodded. She does, my king, she knows what we have arranged. She is taking a bath, then she will dress in her gown for when the Khal arrives later to see her for the first time, then a few hours later they will be wed at sunset. A Dothraki wedding is quite a sight, my king. I suppose it is, but a splendid sight doesn't give me a throne. Will he uphold his side of the deal? I would never forgive myself if he didn't. I would have married my sister to him for nothing, forced her to live a life with those savages. When I come into my throne, I will have her taken from those beasts and brought to me again. I will keep her safe. The Dothraki will uphold their side of the deal, at a time of their choosing. But rest assured, my king, you will have your army. 50,000 Dothraki screamers, enough men to take back your throne once the loyalists rise in your name. My contacts across the narrow sea tell me how they are already sowing the banners for your return, my lord, and though the stag might have their hour in the sun, it is the dragon that will win the day. He smiled at his newfound friend again, his largest supporter. I look forward to having you on my small council when we cross, my friend. The 7 kingdoms are like a festering wound, there is a rot that needs to be cut out, had my family done it sooner there would have never been a rebellion. I will need to start from the beginning, rip up the traitor lords and replace them with people more loyal and to do the same with the small council. I am sure that the Florents will rise for you, as they have always desired to take the Lord Paramountship of the Reach from the Tyrells. The Conningtons were a good loyal house during the rebellion, they could be persuaded to take up the dragon banners once again, perhaps for Storm's End. The Vale too had loyalists, the Corbrays, for instance, and the Riverlands has many loyalist houses, all of which will be competing for your favor when we cross the sea and take back your throne. The Westerlands are mighty and powerful, but they are held together by fear of their liege lords, not love for them. All we must do is smash down their door and they will collapse upon themselves. And the North, he asked. They had been the most dangerous member of the rebels, the driving force behind them, the very reason the rebels had managed to win the war in the first place. My brother would have never kidnapped the northern girl. They lied so that they could take the throne for themselves. I will skin those ravenous wolves to the last babe. Illyrio nodded slowly. They are more dangerous than the others, powerful and unified behind Lord Stark. It will be hard to break them, but they cannot hope to stand against the Iron Throne alone, my king. They will have to be the last on your conquest, once you have cemented control over the rest of the 7 kingdoms and have enough men and ships to defeat them, but I am confident that they will fall, if we attack after winter. When the north falls, I will break it up into smaller Lord Paramount ships. It is too dangerous to allow one lord to control as much land as the rest of the realm combined, even if they are frozen wastes. It would be dangerous to underestimate the Northmen, my king Illyrio warned. Few thought they would be able to field that many men at the start of the usurper's treason against your family, but they had been proven otherwise when the gates of Moat Cailin opened and spilled forth 70,000 men. You doubt that we might be able to defeat the North, then? Never, my king Illyrio smiled again, stroking his pronged and yellow beard. They are merely the most dangerous foe in Westeros and should be treated as such. Viserys smiled again, and nodded at the Magister's advice. Then we will deal with them when the time comes. He turned and headed back into his room inside the manse, taking a flagon of a sweet apricot wine and poured himself a cup. The golden wine sparkled in the growing light of the day and he glanced at his own reflection in the still surface. For a moment he was king, with his father's crown resting upon his head, but then Illyrio's footsteps made the wine shake ever so slightly and the image broke as quickly as it had come. Before long, I won't see this reflection in a cup. I will be seeing it in a mirror. He took a sip as Illyrio followed, till one of his servants came up to him and whispered into the Magister's ear. If you excuse me, my king, I have some matters to attend to. Regarding the wedding he smiled and bowed politely before leaving Viserys on his own. So, the prince headed further into the manse, deciding to explore the Magister's home. It was a large and proud building, as great as a castle, with maybe thousands of servants and hundreds of unsullied guards, who stood as still and as silent as the statues that adorned the halls and grounds. He walked out of the building where his apartment was kept and into the gardens, and on his way there, he heard the familiar clash of steel on steel, a sound that made his hairs stand on end and sent chills of unease through his body. But no one is here to hurt me or my sister, surely. The Unsullied would have stopped them before they could get close. Carefully, his hand went to the sword he kept fastened at his waist as he stepped into the gardens and saw 2 men in armor, knights in full plate, hammering and hacking at one another, a mock battle. One was in blue and white with a breastplate decorated by a golden eagle with a helmet shaped like the head of a bird, the other knight was in red and gold with a lion head helmet. The Lion Knight pressed the attack furiously, never slowing down his flurry of swings, never letting the eagle have a chance to breathe till their blades locked against one another and the lion threw his weight forward and sent his opponent reeling backwards, tripping over a rock on the ground behind him and crashing against the ground. And that was when he saw it, the smoky black steel of the weapon in the lion's hand. The 2 fighters took notice of his presence and the lion quickly threw his weapon from one hand to the other before sliding it into the weapon's scabbard and helping his friend up. So, you must be the king, the lion said, looking him over curiously. Aye, that's him, added the eagle in reply. Silver hair and violet eyes should be a bit of a giveaway, TYG, if having a 3-headed dragon embroidered on his heart wasn't enough. The other knight laughed, then clipped the other around the helm with the back of his gauntlet hand. The lion took his helmet off, holding it under his arm and letting his golden hair flow freely, looking back at the prince with emerald green eyes. But Viserys was most focused on the great tattoo of a lion he had on his left cheek, brilliantly detailed with a dozen different inks to make it look as real as any drawing. I am Tyrion Lannister, and yes, I was at the sacking of King's Landing, and no, I am not here to kill you. Very formal of you, TYG. Hard to tell, your highborn, teased the eagle as he raised his helm, revealing a face that was not quite as handsome as Tyrion's, with cheeks and jaw covered in a brown bristle and dark grey eyes. I'm Brandon of Blackpool. He reached out with his hand, and suddenly a golden eagle darted down and wrapped its talons around his steel vambrace. And this is my bird. She doesn't have a name. Well, the last thing I want is for the king to think we are here to cut him down. Tyrion turned back to Viserys, drew his Valyrian steel blade and knelt, Brandon quickly following. We are here to help you get back on your throne. For a price, of course. What do you want? He asked as he walked over to the 2 impressive fighters. I always have a use for more men, especially when they are as good as these 2. Casterly Rock, instantly answered Tyrion Lannister. And I want nothing really in particular but plenty of gold, pretty girls and huge stretches of land somewhere nice and warm. Viserys blinked at the bluntness of the Northman's request. You will both get what you ask for, if you help me take back my throne. Good enough for me, replied Tijet. We will help get you on the Iron Throne, so long as we get our pay in the end. Doesn't your brother Tywin Lannister control the Rock? He asked. Brandon sighed as his friend glared at Viserys. He does. But that doesn't mean I like him or love him as a brother should. I hate him. He wants me dead as much as I want him dead, he made that clear well enough after the war. Risking his daughter's future as queen, he said. He laughed. He said if I ever go back to the Rock, I would die from a sickness of the bowels. Poison, there's no love between these brothers, added Brandon. He exiled me proper after that, so I went soldiering across the narrow sea. Killing is the only thing I know, so I went killing as a mercenary with the Golden Company, which is how I met Bran here. It didn't work out as planned, said Brandon with a sigh. We fought in a battle against the Cohorix, hacking our way through the Unsullied, you know how it is. Anyway, the Dothraki showed up not long after, so we ended up in a three-way battle, but the company captain ordered a retreat, make it so that the Unsullied and the Dothraki would kill each other instead of us. Well, me and Tijet had skipped a bit of the fighting part and went straight to the looting the dead. That is how I got this. Tijet raised his Valyrian steel blade, letting Viserys see the masterwork ivory grip and pummel. Some Cohoric had it on him when he died, a waste of good steel if you ask me. Tywin would smile at me if he saw me come back to the Rock with this, might even let me back in and call me his brother again, but the only way I will be giving him this is by plunging it through his heart, the miracle of brotherly love. Anyway, we got separated from the rest of the company, so we left by ourselves and ended up getting captured by the Volantens. Who we were fighting for, the bloody idiots didn't realize we were on their side till after they threw us in the fighting pits. Tijet had killed a dozen men before they gave him that tattoo, then they realized that just maybe we were telling the truth when we said we were on their side. Oh, and Tijet owes me 1,000 gold dragons, since I made a bet that we wouldn't get executed. Remember that, TYG. How you promised to pay if we lived. A Lannister always pays his debts, responded the Lion Knight. I will pay you, when I have the Rock. I do not know how you intended to pay me if I won, but I am a man of my word. I will give you enough gold that you could be buried in it. Was that a threat? Do I look like Tywin? I wouldn't know, I never met him. Well, long story short, we stopped working with the company and starting doing small bits of mercenary work by ourselves, for magisters and merchants, killing rivals, pirates, other mercenaries. Wives, on one or two occasions, husbands, a few too many times for my liking, actually. Brandon, remind me never to get married. Who would ever want to marry you, anyway? There was a clank as Tijet backhanded Brandon again. Anyway, eventually we got enough money to get some good armor and replace what we lost in the fighting pits, so here we are. Brandon here is a warg, a good scout too, not so much of a swordsman, since I just beat him with my offhand. The sun was in my eyes. These men are utterly mad, but if even half of what they say is true. Excuses. Anyway, we can't keep soldiering across the narrow sea. We both fought in the rebellion, we're aging men. Brandon is in his late 30s, I am halfway through my 40s. It's time for us to go home, but, well, we need you, your grace. We cannot go home. He stands to get beheaded by the Lord of Winterfell, since he fought for the Tarlis, and I would get killed by Tywin the moment I let down my guard, even if I gave him the sword. And suddenly, he felt a small sense of kindred with the two knights. They want to go home and take what is theirs, like I do. He smiled and nodded at the both of them before replying. I will take you both home with me and give you what is yours, when we cross the narrow sea to take back my throne. Then we are yours to command. Tijet smiled and walked over to him, sheathing his blade. Now, I believe we have a wedding to attend to. Shouldn't we wait for the third one? The sellsword, asked Brandon, taking a position beside Viserys, the two knights escorting their king. There is another of you. Another fighter like these. There is, but I am not impressed by him. He spends most of his team drinking and fucking. Usually both at the same time. Never bothers with trying to practice with that ugly sword o' his. Tidjet sighed. He will probably end up dead the first time we enter a fight. Still, he makes a good meat shield at the least, someone to block arrows with. I would rather let him get killed than scratch my armor. Took ages to get the smith to make it just right. Viserys smiled at his two escorts, and then they started through the gardens, so he asked them more about their travels as they headed to the dining hall for a meal. They must have been to all of the free cities, like I have with my sister. After they fled Braavos with their handful of escorts, they had gone south to Pentos and had their dream of retaking their homelands entertained by a few of the magisters before being thrown back out onto the streets after they had grown bored of hearing of their plight. Pentos was one of the lesser free cities, one that only maintained its independence by carefully balancing their friendships with the other powers that loomed around them, a dwarf surrounded by giants each seeking to gain the upper hand on one another. Braavos hoped to break the back of the slave trade once and for all while MYR was hungry for more lands and willing to pay a price of blood and steel for them, with Pentos caught in the middle between the two bickering powers, playing a careful balancing act to keep both sides content that they were not allied with the other, trying to avoid becoming a vassal to either of them all whilst trying to keep the peace between MYR and Braavos, knowing that the first battleground between the two would be Pentos itself. Tioche had sworn to remain neutral in the affairs of the continent, but had sealed a pact of defense with lies to stave off the fleets and armies that Volantis had been gathering ever since they forced the Cohorix to pay a great tribute of slaves, gold and goods, a peace that had impoverished the city and broke their power all while Volantis drained the city for everlast coin and made it nothing more than a puppet. Lorath was much the same but for Braavos instead, though they had fought no battles against the Braavosi, they danced to the Sea Lord's tune all the same. Norphos and Pentos had no choice but to look to one another for protection, watching over one another and making the same moves to MYR and Braavos, trying to befriend the Volantens or Tioche and Lies to act as a counterweight to MYR and Braavos, but only the former were interested and their terms to protect Pentos and Norphos from Braavos or MYR were little more than to recognize Volantis as being the true and rightful heir of the freehold, and thus to surrender their independence and become subjects to Volantis. But Volantis had been the only free city he and his sister hadn't visited, though perhaps he still would if something went wrong with the Magister's scheme. Perhaps the Old Blood would be willing to help me reclaim my throne. My sister and I are descended from Old Valyria, just as they are, Perhaps, when Westeros falls, I should invite the Old Blood to King's Landing and clean the court with them. I could replace the lords with them and we could reinstate the First Knight and remake Valyria anew after a few generations. Suddenly, a voice called to him from inside the gardens. "My king," said a thin old man, dressed entirely in a green robe so long it trailed behind him as he walked, his sleeves so heavy they concealed his arms and only let his fingers show when they clutched at the gnarled wood staff he used to help him walk. He looked at the man, confused. He had never seen one of them before. The green man walked over slowly as he spoke. "Oh, do not mind my interruption, Your Grace. The Magister is letting me look in his gardens to see if I could grow a wood here. He wants one so that he can boast of having the first wood in Essos." Brandon went pale as the man looked towards him, neither of them saying a word before the old man turned his attention back to Viserys. "Ah, my king, looking forward to the wedding, I hope." "I am," he answered, even though he wanted to keep his sister safe and at his side, not give to some Dothraki horsefucker. "It will give me the army I need to take back my throne. But of course, my noble king. Once your sister is wed to the Khal, you will have the army you need to take the Iron Throne for yourself. To think, after years of suffering and torment, of being hunted by the blades of the usurper, you finally have what you need to go home, or you will, in a few days' time." Indeed, Viserys smiled regally. "It has been a long time coming, but I am finally ready to go home." "Good, good, you never know what tomorrow might bring, good or bad, as I am so sure you have learned by now." The old man tapped the soil with his staff a few times, pushing the point into the soil and moving it around a little. "No, no, this will never do," the old man sighed. "I have been looking around the entire garden for the perfect soil. I wish you luck, but just remember a little advice from an old man, my young king: fate can make a mockery of the plans of all of us. Only the gods can control fate, and they have deigned to make this day possible," he replied. The old man laughed. Indeed, but a man who might see the future and learn from the past can control the present and make his fate whatever he wills. You have suffered before, what is to say you will not suffer again? The old man looked straight at him now, and in the shadow of his robe Viserys could see a pale, expressionless mask as pale as bone, a sight that chilled him to the core for whatever reason, the old man's voice growing darker and more solemn with every word. Who is to say that this Khal decides to simply take your sister and crown you with molten gold when you object? You have lived a long time now, my king, you should consider what might come next, and make plans, just in case things do not come out the way you hope. See what is coming before it comes, my king, and you will have your throne. The man then cheerfully asked, now, I believe Iloio said there was a pond around here. Have you seen it? My eyes are not as good as they once were, and a pond should have better soil. Brandon stared at the green-robed man with a mix of horror and awe as Tijet pointed down the garden. I believe the pond is that way. Ah, thank you, very kind of you to help an old man. He turned and started down the gardens at his slow pace, leaving Viserys and the other three alone. There is something not right about that green man, spoke Brandon with a serious tone he hadn't had earlier. I can't tell what it is. Tijet laughed at his friend's discomfort. Come now, Brandon, you are not afraid of an old man, are you? He seems like a kindly old man to me, probably only has a few years left. He reminds me of Aemon, whenever he came south to speak with Rhaegar. They are both wise men, even if they are old. Brandon rubbed his eyes wearily before they continued on their way when they heard the clatter of horseshoes in the distance. He saw his sister for the first time since the morning, a magnificent beauty in a gown of silver to complement her silver hair and deep purple eyes as stunning as the greatest of amethysts. She was a newly flowered maiden, 3 and 10 name days old, but she was more beautiful than any other woman in the world, he knew. She was to be my queen. Iloio walked from one of his manse's halls, smiling at the sight of her. Daenerys. Dany, Viserys called, drawing the attention of his sweet, timid little sister. Are you ready? His sister looked towards the ground, sadly. Dany, look at me, he growled. She looked up at him, and he saw the rosiness around her eyes where she had been crying. Viserys sighed. You will have to look at the Khal. Do not cry, sweet sister, else you might cost us our chance to take the throne. Yes, brother. She whimpered quietly. They gathered at the entrance of the manse and waited in silence, waiting for the Khal, him holding his sister's hand to comfort her a little, but to remind her of what she had to do, and of who she was doing it for. I have looked after her for years. This is all I ask for in return, a chance to get my throne. My birthright. Then with the thunderous clopping of galloping horses, the Khal and his escorts appeared, a dozen men led by one, a strong muscular man with a long braid of dark hair that stretched down his back and chimed with the sounds of bells. He looked at Daenerys, looking her over from the distance, his little sister unwilling to meet his fiery gaze. How will we know if he likes her? He asked the Magister. If he doesn't, we will know about it, I assure you. Suddenly, the Khal turned, and something went wrong. His horse refused to follow, neighing angrily. The Khal muttered a curse in his barbaric tongue as the stallion fought against his control. Then the horse threw him with all its strength, sending the Khal crashing to the ground to the shock of his followers, but he landed with a smooth roll, utterly unharmed. The Khal roared, bolting back to his feet and ran at the horse from behind to throw himself back onto his back, to show his defiance of his powerful steed's anger and to show his mastery of horses to the men following him. The horse kicked. There was the soft crunch of a crumpling skull and his sister wretched at the sight and sound as the Khal collapsed to the ground, his eyes dead and lifeless as his left temple turned a brilliant shade of purple. No, that was not supposed to happen. That was never supposed to happen. Brandon stood as silent as ice with his jaw agape at the sight as the horse spun round and kicked his rider's limp body again before bolting off into the city. The Khal's escorts, sworn to serve him till he died and to die with him when that happened, stared, frozen in shock at what had just happened in front of them. Viserys grabbed his sister by the arm and took her back into the manse, taking her into his arms and embracing her. I never saw that coming, uttered the battle-hardened Lannister. I have fought Dothraki, killed Dothraki, on the battlefield and in the arena. I have never seen one thrown by their horse, in all my years in Essos. Never. Brandon stayed oddly quiet and all eyes turned to him as he winced. I've got a headache all of a sudden. He rubbed his eyes again. Tidjet laughed at what his friend had accidentally said. A headache, he says. Not as much as the Khal, it seems. Iloyo sighed. That horse cost us years of planning. Viserys didn't care about any of that, he only looked at his sister, wiping her tears away and holding her close to him. Come on, Dany, don't cry. It was not your fault, he soothed. We can find another. But I don't want to marry a Dothraki, she complained, pulling back from him and looking into his own eyes with her tearful ones. He stared back at her and heard his mother's words again. Promise me, Viserys. Look after your sister. Promise me. I cannot look after her if she is away with some lord, Oracle. His heart sank as he realized what he had been about to do. He had promised to protect his sister, to keep her safe and to teach her who she was, and there he was, about to wed her to a Dothraki Khal so that he might have a chance to claim his throne while condemning his sister to a life in the Dothraki Sea. What was I thinking? It is not worth giving her up, never. I will take back the throne with Daenerys at my side, as I promised. I promised mother, and I will do it. No more tears, Dany. He smiled. You don't have to marry a Khal. I will marry you instead, so I might never lose you, my sweet sister. He smiled at her again, wiping her tears from her cheeks. She stared at him in shock and Iloyo sighed. If you do that, it becomes much harder for you to take back your throne, my king, spoke the Magister. It would be best to see her married to someone else, someone with an army. No army is worth losing my Daenerys. I promised mother I would keep her safe. Tidjet and Brandon whispered to each other quietly, Viserys having no idea what they were talking of as he held his sister and hushed her. Daenerys calmed a little in Viserys' embrace, comforted that he would not give her away to some savage, comforted that she would be stuck with someone she knew and not someone who could be so much worse. I might be cruel to her sometimes, but I do it for her own sake. She can never forget who we are, who I am, who she is. Iloyo sighed again. As you wish, my king. Tidjet said reassuringly to Daenerys and all the others, well, at least this way, there is still a wedding and the cooks haven't wasted their time. He gestured for the others to leave and put an arm around his sister, walking with her through the gardens once she had stopped crying. Are we really getting married, Viserys? She asked with some fear. It was obviously caused by her being afraid of the pain that happens during the bedding, he knew. We are, my sweet sister. We will be married, and you will be my queen when we cross the narrow sea and take back the Iron Throne. We will have sons and daughters of our own, little dragons who will rule after us. You'll never have to worry about being taken from me again, or having to be married to a savage like the Khal. Dany. He kissed her on the cheek. I will never hurt you as they might. But, will we really go home? She asked. We will. It might take a little while longer than I had hoped, maybe it'll be our children who take back the throne, but we will try all the same, sweet sister. She shied away from him when he tried to kiss her more passionately, looking at him with fear and concern. He frowned and held her tightly, forcing his tongue into her mouth whether she wanted it or not, just as his father did with his mother whenever he wanted to show how much he loved her. She will learn, in time, what my queen and wife will have to do. She stopped trying to fight him after that, which made him smile after he broke it off and held hands with her, walking with her through the gardens. In the Red Keep, my lady wife, he said with a smile, even though she wasn't yet wed to him. There is a garden as great as this one, with a heart tree of oak in the middle. Our brother used to play his harp there while reading, sometimes just playing it for his wife and his children. He laughed at the sweet memory. I could never play, no matter how much he tried to teach me, but... He took his sister's hands and looked at her fingers. You could play it, if you wanted to. When you are my queen, and when we have the throne, you can do whatever you want to do and have whatever you want, sweet sister. His sister looked at him, her attention caught. I can have whatever I want. Of course. You are a dragon, sweet sister, and you will be my queen. Mother always told me how father treated her well and how the servants and people of the 7 kingdoms did her bidding just as they did his. I want a marriage as happy as theirs. You can order the servants to do whatever you want them to do, even the lords if you want. All we have to do is get our homeland back first. You will rule at my side, like mother and father did. But we have to take Westeros back first, she said, catching on quickly. My sweet sister always had a sharp mind, she will be an excellent queen. We will need help. I have a few ideas, my sweet sister. Volantis might help us, so we will head there, once you and I are wed. She nodded understandingly. He had always told her about the importance of preserving the purity of their bloodline. She had known for many years that she would marry him anyway. The attempt to marry her to that girl, whatever his name had been, would have been breaking from everything he had taught her. She seems more comfortable with marrying me, at least. Good. Our mother always told me how our father listened to the things she had to say. Our marriage won't be any different, sweet sister. Tell me your opinions and I will listen. Your Grace, shouted Brandon. It is time. He smiled at her and took her arm in arm as she thought, leading her to a September inside the manse, one that Illyrio had built for any guests he had visiting from across the narrow sea, with proud statues of each of the 7 wrought from bronze, each standing as tall as any man or woman. Viserys had only one cloak with the Targaryen crest on it, the traveling cloak he always let his sister have, so when it came to swap cloaks he simply threw that one around her shoulders as they exchanged vows under Illyrio's gaze. Then came the wedding feast. His new wife was reluctant to pick at the various pentoshi dishes, nervous even, only going for things that he himself had, but he would not have that from the woman who would rule the 7 kingdoms at his side. Go on, my beloved wife. You can have whatever you want, even if I haven't chosen the same. She looked at him. Truly. He smiled and nodded. Truly. Daenerys smiled at him, a smile that made everything worthwhile, especially his choice to wed her. She became more confident in her choices, picking things that he himself wasn't interested in happily, and when she was happy, he was even more so. See. I have done as you asked, mother. I have kept her safe and happy. He let his guard down with a smile and allowed himself to enjoy the festivities that Illyrio had quickly arranged, a mummer's show and Brandon's incredible skills with his eagle, playing a game with the Magister where he would throw things and Brandon would catch them before they could hit the ground, raising even Illyrio's disappointed spirits back to something more like his normal self. He is inside the bird. Gods, if only I could do that, but with a dragon, I would love to be able to stretch my wings and take flight. To be a dragon in one body and a man in the other. But his eyes stayed on his sister bride, smiling whenever she smiled and laughing whenever she did, happy that she was not as sad as she was earlier, that they were together at long last. Taking back the 7 kingdoms could wait for a little while longer, if it meant keeping his sister this happy and safe. But it couldn't wait forever. The dragon had to rise again from the ashes that had been sown. And it will. So long as my sister and I still live, the dragon will never be slain. Have I missed something interesting? Asked a man he didn't recognize as he stepped into the room. Who are you? He asked. Me. Bronn the sellsword answered as he took a baked pear from one of the bowls on the table. Here to help you get the throne back, for gold. I sell my sword, I don't give it away. Tijet sighed at the mercenary. You will get your spoils when the throne falls to our king and queen over there. He smiled at Viserys and Daenerys. And speaking of our king and queen, a wedding isn't complete without a bedding. His sister retreated back to her nervous and timid self, but he took one look at her and said, no, I will spare her the indignity of that tradition. Then he looked back to his lady wife, but he is right, Dany, we have to retire for the night. She looked at him, then nodded, dutifully, as she always had, weary of rousing his anger. If she is confident and strong to our people, but the way she is to me, I will have the best queen I could have ever wanted. One last thing, your grace. A gift, from myself, for when you reclaim the throne, said the Magister, snapping his fingers. His servants walked in with a heavy and strong wooden chest. But I suppose it can wait for tomorrow morning, my good king. Have a good night. He rose from the table and took her by the hand, sweeping her off her feet and carrying her through the halls. Their travels and the fights against their would-be killers had hardened his body and made him strong, certainly enough to carry Daenerys to their bedchamber. She smiled at him still, more relaxed now that he was letting her do as she wished, as any king would allow their queen. On the way there, he began to explain what would happen between the two of them when they got there, something that made her fall quiet with unease and fear. Then when they arrived at their chambers, he placed her upon their bed, and left her, to get something. What are you looking for, husband? She asked, still getting used to the word. The last thing our mother gave me. He rummaged through his belonging, for the one thing he refused to sell, the one he never wanted to, the one he prayed to keep so that he could give it to her. At the bottom of his own bag, the one where he kept his spare sets of clothing for when they traveled, he felt his fingers touch the cold metal. Carefully, he took it out, and saw his sister's eyes widen at the sight of it. Never forget who you are, sweet sister, you're a dragon, a queen, my queen. He smiled as he walked over, and placed his mother's crown upon her head. I might not have our father's crown just yet, but I will get it, in time. But this one is yours, Daenerys. He smiled at her. She looked truly royal with the golden crown, everything a queen should be, gentle and loving, but confident and strong. It was a simple crown, a queen's crown, but it was a crown all the same, the only thing he had left of his mother, the only thing tying him to his old life across the narrow sea, his most treasured belonging. And it is hers now, as it should be. It is yours now, my wife. She smiled. Thank you, for everything you have done for me, brother, for keeping me safe, for telling me who I am. I would have never known who our mother or father was if you had never told me who we were. Who we are, my sister wife. The throne will be ours yet, if we work for it. He began removing his clothes, all black and red and bought for him by Iloio as a sign of their friendship. We just need allies. We should. His sister started before falling silent. Come now, sweet sister, say your mind. We need to find people who dislike the usurper, then work with them to try and take the throne. The Greyjoys rose against him, didn't they, brother husband? His sister wife slid beneath the covers of their bed, waiting for him to climb in with her, but she smiled at him all the same. Then we will try and speak with them, after we go to Volantis. She nodded. I should have been making use of her mind years ago, but now, with her as my queen, the throne will be ours before long, I am sure. Then she asked a question he hadn't expected. Brother, what do you think is inside the chest Iloio gave us? Clothes, maybe. Gold or jewels? I think they are dragon eggs, she said as he climbed beneath the covers with her, pulling his wife beside him. We will find out tomorrow, my wife, but for now. He smiled, and then he claimed her totally, making love to his sister queen for the first time, hoping that they would make a child so as to secure the future of their line, even in exile. Asterisk 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 asterisk. End of part 9. Notes. Well, where to start? This Viserys isn't quite as broken as the Viserys of canon. Because of the power of the North being so much higher and the North having an actual fleet capable of fighting the Targaryen royal fleet on the high seas, they evacuated the island and ferried them away into exile with a number of ships, leaving many men behind to defend Dragonstone as a distraction, the canon Battle of Dragonstone and the reason why Stannis gets the island in this timeline. Now, because more people went into exile with Viserys and Daenerys, their financial situation wasn't quite as dire, so Viserys never had to sell the crown of his mother, even if he had to sell all the other things in the end. So, he still has some of his marbles. Emphasis on some. He is more like a young Aerys rather than Aerys after Duskendale, with a nice side to him that tries to do the best things he can for his sister, then a more nasty side that is more like the way he is in canon. He's got his ideas of a dream marriage from his mother, who we know tried to hide all his father's bad parts from Viserys as best as she could, something she succeeded in beyond all expectations. That's why Viserys thinks he is making such a wonderful queen by letting her have free roam and the like, since that's what R'hllor told him was happening, even though it wasn't. So, he is trying to recreate what he thinks was the marriage of his mother and father, even though what she told him was certainly not the truth. We also see a little bit more about the relations of the rest of the free cities to one another. Simply put, there is a game of great powers going on over there, feuding as they might be. Myr, Braavos and Volantis are the big three powers, and they are starting to draw out borders and spheres of influence among the free cities. Volantis has practically annexed Qohor and would like to get Norphos and Pentos, but Pentos is caught between Braavos and Myr, who also want the city. Lys and Teosh are protecting one another, and that's one of the reasons that no one has attacked Lys. Jon Arryn didn't want to get the Seven Kingdoms dragged into what could quickly become a massive war between the free cities. He has been more diplomatic about things, a few letters here and there, a sternly worded response and so on, with the threat of power being more useful than the actual deployment of it. We'll see more about that later on. And of course, we see Tywett Lannister. Simply put, there is no love between him and his brother whatsoever. After the Tower of Joy, Tywin was certainly not happy, as a surviving Lyanna would have meant that there would be no way for Cersei to become queen without something happening to Lyanna first, a risky gamble. He doesn't like how Tywett is always so quick to defy him and has practically exiled him from the Westerlands, preferring to think of him as dead, but Tywett is not one to give up so easy and has been soldiering across the narrow sea, hungry for adventure and battle. He's far deadlier than he was then, and even got himself a Valyrian steel blade. He knows full well how much Tywin wants one, but he'll never give him it and has a desire to claim the rock for himself, hence why he and his companion have ended up in the service of Viserys, hoping that the exile king can gather enough support to take them across the narrow sea. Then there is a green man, and they have an agenda all of their own. Chapter 10, Benjen I. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. *********. Beyond the wall. Benjen looked at the woods of the haunted forest from across the snow-covered fields, every breath he took becoming a mist of white. Even after spending years in the service of the Night's Watch, since the end of Robert's rebellion even, he had never gotten used to how much colder the wall was than Winterfell, no one ever did. The north is cold, but it might as well be dawn when you are north of the wall. Here, in the coldest parts of Westeros outside the land of always winter, snow and sleet and hail were more often than not, except for the warmest days of summer when the wall would weep freezing tears that had made it wider at the bottom than it was at the top. He was the first ranger of Castle Black, one of the highest-ranking brothers in the entire watch as a trusted advisor to the Lord Commander himself, but he still liked to take command of some of the rangings personally so that he always remembered what it was like to be out in the snows. Of course, everyone knew he would not be allowed to go on them ever again before long. The Lord Commander had made his plans known well enough to all the Black brothers. Everyone knew that it would be Benjen who would be the first to receive his own command beyond the protection of the wall, a castle of his own that would project power deep into the haunted forest and would protect the free folk who had settled down under the protection of the Night's Watch from the true, savage wilderling raiders. The Lord Commander had given him a small retinue of men for his mission, 36 rangers, 24 builders and a handful of stewards, all to help him find a good site to start construction. It was far more than simply finding room for them to build. They had to find a location that was easy to defend from the wildlings, with a good supply of drinking water, fuel and food, all three of which could be sparse at different times of the year. A freshwater spring could freeze as hard as iron in winter, game would flee into the forests never to be seen again, and even finding the haunted forest could be difficult in a winter's blizzard when one could barely see their hands, yet alone any trees to use as fuel to melt ice or to warm their holes and cook their meals. They needed open space, then, big enough to store the things they needed through winter, on a well-defended spot, with ready access to a supply of food, water and fuel. Stone blocks could be sent down the Milkwater from the Frost Fangs on barges for use by the builders, but for most of the work they would need to use wood. But we'll need to use stone for the walls, at least the lower half of them. The wildlings might not know how to work steel or how to build a tray bucket, but they know how to start fires. Looks like there would be enough wood for fuel and building, said Waymar Royce as he pointed to some open space on the edge of the forest. If we cut back the tree line, we would have a good field of view. Aye, and the forests would be out of things to hunt the moment winter arrives. Wouldn't need the wildlings to kill you, Benjen replied, the lack of food would do it for them. He's a brave man and a fine sword, but he needs time to learn. He will make a fine ranger one day, maybe even first ranger or master at arms. The Night's Watch had no shortage of recruits. The cities and towns of the north always gave the men who broke the law the option to take the black instead of whatever normal punishment they might have faced, with most of them deciding to go to the wall rather than become a burden on their kin by losing a limb or to avoid feeling the cold bite of an executioner's blade. It mattered little to Benjen. Once they swore their oaths, they were his brothers, regardless of whether the reasons they had to take the black were noble or otherwise. Waymar wore armor just like his father's, except that it was painted black in a way that drew attention to the protective runes and wards that had been etched by the green men onto the castle-forged steel. He had been placed under Benjen's care in the hope that some of his experience would rub off on the young, brash recruit, but there were others too, people from all parts of Westeros, even if most of the recruits came from the north. There was a man from Skagos, who knew only a few words of the common tongue, but he was perhaps one of the best trackers in the watch, if not in Westeros, and he spoke the old tongue of the first men perfectly, always helpful when meeting with the few tribes of the free folk who only rarely met with the watch. There were men who had been on the wrong side of the war when the dragon and the stag had clashed against one another, knights and men at arms loyal to the dragons who had taken the black after the war's end, but they were as rare as those who chose to come to the war willingly. Many more of his brothers had humbler origins and were the criminals of the north, the thieves and pickpockets who had been caught stealing from the marketplaces, poachers and cattle raiders who stole livestock from the herds of their neighbors or hunted in the wrong woods, corrupt guardsmen who had closed their eyes to the crimes going on around them or even helped with them, even fraudsters and dodgy customs officials who tried to trick the common people of the north out of their wealth. They were the majority of the Night's Watch, but there were a handful of ice-blooded murderers and rapists, but they never lasted long, not before they fell from the top of the wall or had any other manner of accident. It was one thing for someone to break the law out of their desperation, that many people at the wall could understand, out of greed and anger even, but to hurt others needlessly. It crosses a line for most of my brothers. They were just normal men in their lives before coming to the war, with sons and daughters, wives, brothers and sisters. When they find out someone raped a girl who wasn't even flowered yet, they think of their family and friends before making them disappear into the snow. He flexed his fingers, hearing the muffled sound of the gauntlets through his fur cap and direwolf bassinet. North of the wall, plate armor was utterly impregnable. No weapon forged by the wildlings could breach a good hauberk, yet alone a full suit of plate like the one he was wearing. The black steel was as cold as the seven hells, but so long as he was wearing his thick layer of arming clothes beneath, he hardly felt any of the metal's cold caress, though on a cold enough night his armor would start misting whenever they lit a fire. But it could quickly get tiring, especially after a blizzard put down a fresh layer of snow for him to slog through. But if I have to trade a little comfort for being invincible, it is a simple choice to make. It is hard to be comfortable when you're dead. The lower-ranked brothers besides him had simpler protection for the most part. The Rangers wore hauberks and boiled leather with a variety of helms, all equipment sent from the north as supplies for the watch to use. The Night's Watch had hundreds of smiths of their own in the gifts, who paid their taxes through providing weapons and armor for the Black Brothers, just as the farmers and herdsmen paid theirs by giving a small fraction of their harvest to the watch so that the brothers were not as dependent on the north for food supplies. But there was only so much they could do, so the north provided a vast amount of arms for the watch, spares and old weapons and armor, but still far better than what they could expect to get from the south, who often sent weapons and armor so rusty it was easier for the smiths to melt it down into raw iron and reforge the metal into horseshoes and nails than to try and make it battle-worthy. They do it so they can clear out room in their armories and say they are helping us at the same time, but they really don't care for the war, or the Night's Watch, only for the prestige they get for giving us their scraps and boasting to their friends about it. Ned doesn't do that. He has Mikan and all the other smiths make weapons and armor for us whenever they have the time. If it wasn't for my family's help and that of the north, the watch would have fallen long ago. It was dying when Aegon conquered Westeros, but since then we have grown stronger and more powerful every year, just as the north has. We have as many swords as most armies, now. We need to find a stream, for food and water. It would be even better if we could find a lake, too. Wouldn't a lake freeze come winter? Asked Waymar, his face buried beneath a layer of black furs and cloth that let only his eyes through. Only on the surface. The stewards can drill through the ice and get to the fish and water beneath, even in winter, answered Willam, one of his rangers, a thin man only a little older than Waymar who came from the streets of White Harbor, choosing to join the Black Brothers rather than starve any longer. He was not much of a swordsman, but the powerful crossbow he had slung across his back meant he never had to use a sword anyway. He was wearing a black coat of plate atop boiled leather and a kettle helm with a long coif, good armor for any man who would never be fighting a wildling raider up close, but all the same he had a buckler fastened to his forearm and a falchion at his hip, a weapon that was as useful at chopping through trees for firewood as it was at cleaving through men. One of the builders, Brandon, stepped forward with a suggestion. Might be best for us to go west, to the Milkwater. We don't have the equipment for us to go into the Frostfangs. It'd be madness for us to try, added Guard, another ranger on his last ranging before he would start to train the younger recruits. There's Shadowcats in those lands, and wildlings and other things. Waymar laughed. You're not scared of a few fairy tales, are you? The others are long gone, and they're ice spiders. No, Benjen added, Guard is right. We don't have the supplies to go into the Frostfangs, but we wouldn't need to go all the way. If we go northwest of the Fist of the First Men and the free folk who live there, we have the Milkwater for food and drink, the Haunted Forest for lumber and the Frostfangs for stone. It is the perfect place for us to start work. Good place, chimed in the Skagasi suddenly, breaking his usual silence. Unlike the others who mostly wore chainmail, he was wearing a suit of steel scale mail over leather padded with cow fur and carried a halberd. Go there. Yes. Benjen nodded, and instantly the crafty, clever Skagasi set to work. He crouched down on the ground and scooped out a handful of snow to make a bowl in the ground, then poured some water from his flask into the hole, filling it halfway. Then he reached into one of his pockets and plucked out a thin metal needle that he dropped onto the top of the water. It floated at the top, just barely, then the Skagasi shielded it from the winds with his hands, and it suddenly started to turn on its own, pointing into the distance all on its own. The Skagasi then plucked out the needle and scooped up more snow to put into his waterskin, then waved with his hands the directions, pointing into the heart of the blizzard before putting the metal needle back in his pocket. That way be wester, half-day walk to biggest rock. What? Asked Waymar, confused as the Skagasi tracker turned and started walking in the direction he pointed, Benjen and the entire group following. How in seven hells does he know that from a piece of metal? The needle points north, Waymar. It's a wilderling trick, Guard explained as the group started westwards. They mightn't know much about working metal, but they know how to get it to point north. They can't find their way home without it, else they would get lost in a blizzard and freeze to death. The free folk are more clever than we give them credit for, Waymar, Benjen added. We can learn a lot from them. If ships can start getting needles like those, they wouldn't need to wait for nightfall to see the ice dragon and find where they are. Looking at the stars was one of the most important ways for a ship's crew to know where they were, and no group of stars were more important than the ice dragon. Traveling towards the eye of the ice dragon always took them northwards, so if they headed away from it they traveled south instead. Every sailor worth their salt on a ship could find the ice dragon at night and thus find out which way was north or south, but the best navigators could use it to find west and east, too. But the metal needles some of the wilderling clans used to travel were even more valuable in that it meant anyone could find which way was north, and in day, too. We have as much to learn from them as they have from us. He and the Lord Commander Giamormont both agreed that it was best for them to try and befriend the people beyond the wall with trade and a gentle touch, not to try and slaughter all of them whenever they dared to show themselves. Most of the free folk were normal men and women going about their lives as best as they could in the worst lands in Westeros, living, laughing and loving in the almost everlasting snow of the frozen north. Had the wall been built further to the north, they would be just like the people in Winterfell. It was only chance that meant they were on the wrong side of it when Brandon finished building it. So the Night's Watch had befriended the free folk, letting them settle in the haunted forest, letting them live in peace and never once raising a weapon in anger against them, even coming to their aid whenever they were attacked by the true savages, the wildlings. Most people think the free folk and the wildlings are the same, but they aren't. The free folk are normal people who only want to live their lives in peace and want no trouble. They trade with us and the North, giving us furs and ivory and other such things in exchange for food and things they cannot make themselves. They are good people, some even go on to live in Skagos so their grandsons can live in the north and the rest of Westeros. I trust them, but the wildlings are killers. They raid the free folk, slaughtering their men and raping their women, stealing everything they can use to attack the wall, but it always ends the same. The wilderling invasion crushed against the wall, their king slain in battle and the entire host scattered across the land. I have no ill feelings for the free folk, but I have only hate for the damned wildlings. Thankfully, more of the wildlings are starting to see reason as time goes on, settling down themselves and giving up on trying to fight against us. However, there was still one man holding them together. The king beyond the wall, Tormund Giantsbane. He tried to keep the wildlings held together to fight the Night's Watch and not each other or the free folk, but Mance Rayder, who was the commander of Westwatch by the bridge, believed he might be the last ever king of the wildlings should he be slain in an attack on the wall, as far too many wildlings had settled down with the free folk to amass another invasion. Mance was a wilderling babe himself, adopted by the Watch. Might have been they left him for dead, but we raised him as our own. He's a good man, and true, but he and the Lord Commander have been speaking a lot lately. I don't know why, but I have heard the rumors. Few knew what Mance Rayder and the Lord Commander had been speaking about, but there were countless rumors. One was that the old bear had been readying Mance Rayder to take his place, which was certainly a possibility, as Mance Rayder was a natural leader. Everyone knew that, though people also knew he took the oaths and traditions of the Night's Watch more as guidelines than actual rules to be followed. But maybe that is what he is talking about with the Lord Commander. A change to our oaths. I wouldn't put it past him to try and persuade the Lord Commander, especially if he has the backing of Khor in Death Hand. The strangest rumor of all was that they had become lovers, though the first time he heard that idea it had made him laugh. The South, the true South below the neck, already think of us as an army of sword swallowers and man lovers. It doesn't help that they know we have steam baths just as the rest of the North, for rangers to warm up in after a long journey. He sighed as they walked, keeping his visor down to keep the cold winds and snow out of his eyes as they walked, looking around for any sign of wildling raiders, only to see more snow-covered plains and even more snow coming down from the white skies above. The wildlings always wore white, blending into the snow as if they others, almost impossible to see whenever they lay on the ground, with even the glimmer of metal looking like nothing more than fresh fallen snow. But we were all black. They can see us, but we cannot see them. But no wildling is foolish enough to try and attack us in a blizzard, no one is. He kept flexing his fingers back and forth, trying to stop them from getting too stiff as they walked westwards through the snows in silence, till Waymar Royce walked up to him with questions in mind. When the Skagasi said we were going west, why did he call it Wester? He speaks the old tongue first and the common one second, he explained as the new ranger walked at his side. Skagos is two words put together. Os is land, Skag is stone. Wester, S, north and Sothor are the directions. Waymar stared back at him in realization, having never heard even a few words of the old tongue before. Did you think it was the Valyrians or the Andals who named the lands? Benjen laughed. The first men were here first, and we gave the land its name. Westland, Westeros. Westeros. Shouldn't that be the Westerlands, though? You would think so, but from what I know, there wasn't really a part of Westeros called the Westerlands then. How do you draw the line between the Westerlands, the Reach and the Riverlands before there is such a thing as any of them? When the Andals came and the Lannisters became strong enough to defeat their rivals, that is where the Westerlands came from, long after the new tongue had replaced the old. The Royces are of the first men, he even has runes on his armor, but he doesn't know a single word of the old tongue. Haven't you ever been taught anything about the old tongue? I know enough to say a few things, but I let the Skagasi speak for me. He knows enough common to understand what I am saying, but the old tongue was his first language and he is far better with it than I am, good enough to speak to any chiefs of the free folk we meet without offending them by accident. No, my maester never mentioned anything about it. But my father told me about Rakard Stark, how he was encouraging him to teach us the language, how to read runes. He wanted us to embrace our roots more. That sounds like my father. Benjen laughed again at the memories that started to come forth, sweet times before the rebellion sundered their family. He always liked families of the first men who carried on their heritage and traditions. He called us all brothers. Father's dead now, as is Brandon and Lai, too, but they'll live on, so long as people remember their names and who they were. Waymar laughed. My father told me the same thing. I'm sure he learned it from your own father. He said that we should act more like the first men we are and not like the Andals in the rest of the Vale, that we need to remember who we are. So, when I was offered a knighthood, I turned it down. The old gods have no knights. I won't stand a damned vigil all night in a September just to be called sir. A sir killed the High King Robar, and Gregor Clegane is a sir too. He must have forgotten the part of the vow to protect the young and the innocent when he beheaded the Targaryen babe. Some say he was meant to deliver the child to Robert in person, but when he started crying, the mountain got so mad he tore his head off with his bare hands. If half of what they say about him is true, I hope to never meet him. He is too much of an animal for the war. Benjen had never been to King's Landing. He had been the Stark in Winterfell while his brother campaigned, leaving him with the responsibility of running the North and Winterfell at little more than the age of 5 and 10. Beautiful maidens sought his attention, as many thought that he would take a lordship in the north after the war was over, or if his brother was to fall in battle without first sowing a son on his new wife, then it would make him the lord of Winterfell. Thankfully, it never happened. We won the war, though it was not much of a victory. We lost father, we lost Brandon, and we lost Lyanna, too. Had I lost Ned, too, I would have put our fleets to sea and closed Moat Cailin forever. I would have made it so there were 6 kingdoms under the Iron Throne, not 7. He had never had an interest in being a lord, yet alone being the king in the north, but he would have done it all the same if it meant keeping the north and all its people safe from the madness of the Iron Throne. He might have even accepted a lordship. Once, his father had offered him a town of his choice anywhere in the north, and Ned had maintained the offer after the rebellion came to an end. But Benjen had learned his true calling in life at Harrenhal, where the recruiter of the Night's Watch, Thorin Deathhand himself, was regaling everyone with tales of his adventures and battles beyond the wall, and how he had slain Varami Fiveskins and his monstrous snow bear in an epic struggle, the battle that gave him his name, as he killed all of the Wilderling warg's skins one after another, like cutting off the fingers of a hand before felling the snow bear and climbing atop the dying creature to finish the warg in single combat. Even then the Night's Watch was packed with men, but few of them had